Full spoilers for The Last of Us, right from the start. Play it or make peace. I'm also gonna spoil the ending of Shadow of the Colossus. I know, bear with me. There will also be mild spoilers for the show and part 2, but I won't be specific. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, okay, full spoilers from now. In the final moments of one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, protagonist Joel Miller storms one of the few remaining hospitals on the planet, murdering one of the few remaining surgeons and a whole bachelor's party worth of guards with a selection of weapons, both looted and grimly improvised. This is the culmination of a journey that has spanned months, cost him his home, his closest friend, and whatever future he had previously assumed this one last job would settle him in for. When he reaches the top floor, Joel barges in on the surgery of young teen Ellie Williams, murders the doctor and his assistants, and leaves with the girl. And the question of whether this was the right thing to do has been hotly debated for years. I've played through The Last of Us probably like 5 times now. I love it so much. And yet the more I play it, the more of a sour taste the ending leaves in my mind. The more I interrogate that feeling, the more I realise it has come about as a result of it being one of the most circumstantially contrived endings in gaming. And I think that's because the writers underestimated their audience and played it extremely safe, and I don't think they needed to. Don't get me wrong, The Last of Us is an unparalleled game. It's one of the best of all time. That said, by the end of this video, I want to give you a different perspective on how it all wrapped up. That last segment exactly, that last 10 to 30 minutes. I want to look at one of the most impactful endings in gaming history and pitch to you the idea that had any minor detail been even slightly different, it would have had massive repercussions for Joel's character and every decision made up until that point. And I want to pitch to you why that game is so fantastic that it still would have completely worked. Let's go. Well, first I want to pitch to you why you should be getting in on Brilliant. Brilliant is a platform that offers countless lessons in some of the most challenging aspects of computer science. Everything from foundational math skills to data to programming, Brilliant offers a huge selection of hands-on interactive lessons to make the most of in your learning journey. Whether you're here to finally pick up that new coding skill you've always wanted, or you want to hone your existing skills and excel within your career, Brilliant is carefully calibrated to ensure it can offer a course that fits your needs first. In fact, Brilliant evolves alongside you. New content is always being added, so you'll always have something new to challenge yourself with. Try it out on your commute or while you're having your breakfast. Brilliant allows you to learn on the go in daily bite-sized chunks. Pick whatever subject you're curious about and turn that curiosity into knowledge. Try an introduction to data science or creative coding. Maybe even just brush up on your math skills with their fantastic algebra and geometry courses. There's so much to try, so get started today. Try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/merkk. I have either link in the description or by scanning the QR code on screen. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring today's video. So let's interrogate that ending a little bit more closely. In a world where the cordyceps infection has turned most of humanity into highly aggressive fungal freaks hell-bent on spreading the infection through bites and airborne spores, it's not looking good for what remains of society. It's extremely easy to be infected, and once infected, it takes anywhere between hours and a couple of days to turn. One note we find in the introduction details the experience of a group who came to the outskirts of the quarantine zone, dipping into one of the derelict buildings when a patrol came by. After some time, the group realised that the building was full of airborne spores, and the rest is history. Bites take hours to progress, but miserable fungal enslavement and death is assumed to be inevitable. That is, until we meet Ellie. Bitten 3 weeks prior, Ellie's bite is a healing wound by the time she meets Joel and his partner in crime, Tess, rugged smugglers jaded by years on the job. When Ellie's guardian and leader of the Fireflies, Marlene, is gravely injured, she turns to the only people she has available, offering Joel and Tess a huge payload, a retirement-level payload, if they can get Ellie safely out of the city. See, Ellie is immune to the cordyceps infection, and the Fireflies hope to reverse engineer a vaccine. Only by the time they escape the city of Boston, losing Tess in the process, they find the Fireflies sent to collect Ellie are dead, and the only lead Joel has is his estranged younger brother Tommy, now living all the way over in the young settlement of Jackson, Wyoming. Over a course of many months, Joel and Ellie embark on a legendary trek across what's left of the United States of America, passing through ramshackle settlements and decrepit cities alike. Billstown, a settlement in Lincoln, Massachusetts, the miserable streets of the now bandit-ruled Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Tommy's Dam in Jackson, Wyoming, the previously Firefly-run, now abandoned University of Colorado, the snowy resort of Lakeside, Colorado, and finally, here and now, Salt Lake City, the last bastion of the Fireflies and the location of their few remaining vaccine specialists. The journey spans 3,000 miles and roughly a year, and when Joel and Ellie arrive at Salt Lake City, a few specific things happen. Firstly, Ellie is unconscious, encountering an altercation in the tunnels below the city involving a few bloaters and a lot of rushing water. Ellie nearly drowns and Joel risks everything to pull her out. Only when they're finally spat out onto the cold, damp roads of Utah, they meet the Fireflies. Joel raises his hands and speaks with urgency, telling them that Ellie is unconscious and needs mouth to mouth. The Fireflies respond by knocking him unconscious, hitting him hard over the back of the head with the butt of their rifles. Very uncalled for. When Joel comes to, Ellie is nowhere to be seen. Marlene is here with a guard who is already watching Joel like a hawk. She thanks Joel sternly for bringing Ellie to Salt Lake City and then tells him that the surgery is going to kill her. Ellie isn't immune to the infection necessarily, like she's fully infected. The cordyceps has wrapped around her spinal cord and infected her brain, but it just doesn't work. She doesn't have any symptoms. Unfortunately, however, they need to slice that big head open and figure out what makes her so special, and that means that she is going to die in the process. When Joel asks if he can speak to Ellie and say goodbye, Marlene tells him that Ellie is already under anesthetic, reassuring him that it was a difficult choice for her too. He pushes and she has the Firefly hit him. She treats him like a dog. When Joel starts to kick up a stink, Marlene asks her guard to escort him out. The Firefly does, but not without employing a GP receptionist level of sadism. He goads Joel verbally and physically, treats him like a dog, and threatens to kill him. Not only is this Joel's reward for completing a task for the Fireflies that cost him everything, frustrating on a professional level, but this complete void of empathy or sympathy is designed to outrage the player in particular. Joel has no agency and neither do you. Distraught by losing his closest friend, his essentially adoptive daughter, and all that remains of the people who died to see him this far, outraged at their hand-waving of his only opportunity to say goodbye to her or even check that this is what she wants, bitter at his blunt lack of agency in the situation, and absolutely sick to the back teeth of having this micro-penis energy bully pointing a gun in his face and threatening to shoot, Joel snaps. He kills the guard and, now firmly committed, storms the hospital. You don't have any choice here as the player besides turning off the game, I suppose, but you do have a choice in how he does this. Some of you may already have commented to tell me that you don't have to kill the guards, and that's true. It's just hard to write an impactful introduction when you're filling it with disclaimers, so I'll address it here instead. Joel has combat and stealth capabilities. You can rush the hospital and murder every last person, or you can stealth through it. I always just end up shooting my way there regardless, even on grounded, because I can't sneak for the life of me, but many have reported being able to reach the surgery without killing a single person. Regardless of the choices of millions of players, there will be a canon outcome. Whether Joel killed everyone, some of the people, or no one, ultimately it doesn't matter. There will be at least one death, and that death will be the surgeon. With that surgeon dead, Joel lifts Ellie's unconscious body off the hospital bed and rushes out the back, taking a tucked away exit down to the underground car park where he encounters Marlene, who he kills before making his escape. Ellie doesn't wake up until they're hours down the road, and when she asks why they're not at the hospital anymore, Joel is like, oh, don't worry about that. They have so many immune people running around nowadays that they don't actually need you anymore. So they put you in the car in your hospital gown and then just let you leave without saying goodbye. So naturally she's like, right, okay. As the pair of them return to Jackson to begin their new life together as adopted father and daughter, she stops him to talk.
I'm still waiting for my turn.
Ellie.
Her name was Riley, and she was the first to die. And then it was Tess. And then Sam.
None of that is on you.
Oh, you don't understand.
I struggled for a long time with surviving. And you... No matter what, you keep finding something to fight for. Now, I know that's not what you want to hear right now.
Swear to me. Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
This moment of the game is deeply uncomfortable. You are watching Joel, a man who risked everything to get Ellie to Salt Lake City, only to burn it all down again, lie to her face. The Fireflies were worried that he would be a danger to them if he didn't get what he wanted, and he proved them correct. This moment is the what have I done slap in the face for any first-time player. And it works. Kind of. Looking back on Joel's choices, it's easy for most to acknowledge that what he did was bad and selfish. But most players will still understand where he's coming from, and some will also fully sympathise. Some people don't even think what he did was bad. And this is a very specifically manufactured response because it arises from a very specifically manufactured grey area of morality. Because for all intents and purposes, Joel has doomed the world to save Ellie. I know it's not that black and white, we'll discuss it later, but functionally, this is what he has done. Joel learns to love again, but fixing this problem dooms everybody else. That's quite a sin. So for us to still see him in a moral grey area, the game sets up several factors that play into our judgments. There are 3 key factors that have to be perfectly aligned for him to be morally grey in the most emotional, subjective sense of morality. 1. We have to like Joel more than we like the idea of a vaccine. 2. We have to believe that violence is just a means to an end for him. 3. We have to feel as selfishly about Ellie as he does. And from there are 3 key factors that have to be perfectly in place for Joel's behaviour to be morally grey in the most technical, literal sense of morality. 1. Ellie has not consented to the surgery in any meaningful way we can see. 2. Joel is acting in self-defence and presumed defence of an unconscious young girl. And 3. The Fireflies cannot prove themselves to be competent. So, 6 factors and 6 points. Let's discuss. Ethics and law are entirely different things. To quote a body of work that actually knows what it's talking about, the National Library of Medicine distinguishes the two with the statement, ethics and law are the different forms of rules by which humans are expected to behave themselves in society. Ethics represents an internal system of controls, and law refers to an external mechanism of control. To put it simply, ethics are voluntary social expectations. Laws are rigid, institutionalized regulations produced to preserve order. Breaking the law is punishable. Being unethical, while socially frowned upon, is not always punishable. When we discuss the subjective morality of Joel, we are essentially examining him by his ethics, both personal and social. When we discuss his objective morality, we are judging him by present-day legal standards of crime and sin. We're going to look at the kind of person he is, both past and present, how his personal ethics conflict with wider social ethics, and how our affection for him wins out. After that, we'll look at the nitty-gritty of his objective morality, whether he does the right thing in the end. Is the Joel we meet after the time skip a bad man who does good things, or a good man who does bad things? Joel is a man with a lot of nuance, in good ways and bad, and The Last of Us is extremely selective in what it tells us about Joel versus what it shows us about Joel. It's also extremely selective in the characters he meets along his journey, living and dead, people who serve as stark reminders of who Joel could be, for better or worse, each one a lesson in what he needs to become. Let's start with the obvious. The prologue of The Last of Us takes place in 2013. Joel is in his early 30s, a single dad and contractor working his ass off to afford their ludicrously big house down in Texas. We meet him on his birthday, actually. He gets home after a long day of work to see his young daughter Sarah, who has stayed up late to give him a birthday present. It's a watch.
Where did you get the money for this?
Drugs. I sell hardcore drugs.
Oh, good. You started helping out with the mortgage then.
Yeah, you wish.
In this opening scene alone, we can see that the two share a fantastic relationship despite his long working hours. She's absurdly sharp, and his retorts are good-humoured and witty. It's a scene with an enormous amount of love. We spend our first playable moments in this game as Sarah herself. She wakes up at almost 2 in the morning. Taking a pause to look at the birthday card she forgot to give Joel, making a mental note to give it to him later, she heads downstairs, unaware that society is collapsing under her very feet.
Jimmy!
Dad?
Come here, come here. Jimmy! Jimmy, just stay back! Jimmy, I am warning you!
Joel's first kill, the first life he ever takes, is when he shoots this man to save his daughter. Moments later, Tommy, Joel's brother, arrives with a vehicle and the family take flight. I'll make this disclaimer now so that I don't have to do it every single time, but to be clear, I'm not making moral judgment on Joel and will not be doing so throughout this video. I will point out the things he does and what that tells us about him as a person, but I'm not going to sit here and police the behaviour of a fictional character. Please bear in mind that when I describe actions taken by Joel, I am doing that to tell you what he does. Not endorsing it, not condemning it, just describing it. See, Joel is flawed but human right from the get-go. Encountering a family on the road with children, waving and shouting for help, Joel refuses to even acknowledge them.
See what they need.
Who do you think you're doing? Keep driving.
I got a kid, Joel.
So do we.
We have room.
Keep driving, Tommy.
This makes some sense, considering his neighbour just attacked him out of nowhere and he doesn't understand why, but also goes to show that he plays it cautious to the point of abandoning others in need. Joel cares about his own and won't risk Sarah's health, even if it means leaving people to die, and even if those people have kids. That's him pre-apocalypse, like that's how he is already. A nasty collision leaves Sarah's leg severely injured, and the family staggering through the city past running, screaming, and confused crowds and early-stage rabid infected. In all the ruckus, it's probably fairly easy to miss the incredible bond shared between Joel and Tommy. Joel was the first person Tommy ran to when society collapsed, and when holding the door against a crowd of infected, Tommy shouts at Joel to run with Sarah, functionally sacrificing himself for the pair to escape. Sprinting out beyond the town, through trees and along dirt paths, Joel and Sarah's journey is stopped by a soldier. Although we only hear one side of the conversation with the commander, it's abundantly clear as to what he has been ordered to do.
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Although Joel begs and Tommy rushes in to save the day, it's too late. The soldier shoots at Joel and his daughter. A bullet hits Joel's new birthday watch, breaking it, and his daughter's abdomen. The death is nowhere quick as it should be. She cries and screams on the floor for what feels like minutes as Joel sobs over her and Tommy watches helplessly. And when I say I cry every time, I mean it. It's both obvious and interesting as to why this is the aspect of Joel's backstory the game has chosen to show us. As we'll learn about Joel, he has a checkered past that goes largely unelaborated on, both because Joel refuses to discuss it and because so few people are alive to tell the tale. Later, when driving to Pittsburgh, Joel and Ellie will encounter a man limping, screaming for help. Joel isn't fooled, speeding up at the man who suddenly quits limping to pull out a gun and shoot. Later, when Ellie quizzes Joel on how he knew that man was going to hold them at gunpoint and rob them, he responds, "I've been on both sides." And that's all he ever says about it. Although we see the night that time stopped for Joel, as symbolised by his shattered watch, that's all the past we get to see. By the present day, 20 years later, Joel and Tommy are long since estranged. He is scarred and haggard with big bags under his eyes and a nasty broken nose, and he is so dead inside he could be a walking dead prop. There's not much to argue here beyond be cognizant of what exactly we have been shown, and what exactly we have not been shown. In the story rule of show don't tell, it's universally understood that showing an audience something is most impactful. When it comes to Joel's characterization, we are shown the tragic backstory that makes us care about him, whereas we are told about the details of his backstory that would sour an audience to him. That's intentional. Another important thing to note about Joel's characterization is that it is initially incredibly passive. Joel is given a partner in crime, Tess, after the time skip, and while Tess is her own character with her own stuff going on, she also serves the purpose of being the active member of the duo. She makes decisions and plans, she organizes ahead, she negotiates, she intimidates, she's attacked by local knobhead Robert's men while performing some solo work, she pursues him herself. Although Joel holds him down and breaks his arm when he won't crumble under her interrogation, she is the one who shoots him dead, and when Marlene introduces them to something, or rather someone, she wants them to smuggle, it is Tess who takes the job, and Tess who pushes on when the going gets tough, and Joel would much rather get going. If you watch the introductory chapters very carefully, you'll see a lot of evidence that Joel is a bit of a pain. Like when a guy asks Joel who he's looking at, and his buddy apologizes on their behalf, knowing enough of Joel to understand that insults don't necessarily go unpunished with him.
Yeah, asshole, what are you looking at?
Ronnie, shut the fuck up. Hey, Joel, we're not looking for trouble, okay?
No harm, no foul.
We see Tess and Joel lie their way out of the quarantine zone they're in. We hear them share stories of past smugglings and trouble with rival gangs. We see Joel pull out some absolutely cracked combat skills, but when it comes to decision making and decisive action, that's not his remit. The in-universe explanation for this is probably just that Joel is merely along for the ride. This man has nothing left to live for and nothing dumb enough to die for. He tags along with Tess and does what she says because it gets him ration cards, and a big enough collection of those will mean an easy life. The meta explanation for this is that Joel now has a buffer between him and acts that the player might judge on moral grounds. Sure, being the tag-along and the right-hand man for violent Tess is not exactly stellar behaviour, but Joel's hands are comparatively clean, and all he's doing is trying to get back some guns of theirs that Robert sold on, and Robert shot at them first, so really you could say that Joel is acting in self-defense while pursuing property that was stolen from him, technically. As the game goes on, Joel will make progressively more erratic and violent choices. In the Colorado Lakeside Resort chapter, very late game, game, he's a borderline sociopath, a trained killer with zero remorse. You can't start him like that in chapter 1 because your audience isn't going to relate to him. It might be cool if the game opened on him beating 2 men to death and popping kneecaps in a torturous interrogation scene. Like, you might think he's quite badass, but making him a father first and a passive vessel of combat second better facilitates the way the audience warms up to him. Like a frog in a boiling pot, you get the audience in, get them settled, and then slowly raise the temperature without them even noticing. Tess is the perfect conduit for that, as she filters Joel's agency and shoulders his choices. He's just a grumblebee and a crotchety old man with a mean punching arm, living in a shithole full of crime and big gangs and mandatory military service. Like, he's just doing what he can to survive. The Last of Us is also fantastic at creating situations wherein game mechanics perfectly serve the story. When you critically wound enemies without killing them, you might notice that they begin to beg for their lives. The first time this happens, you'll back off, surprised. Then when the NPC recovers HP after a short window, they'll suddenly try to kill you again. You might give a second NPC a chance, but not a third. The game conditions you to see enemies begging for their lives as dangers to be killed, and after a while you'll be shooting people dead no matter how much they beg and cry and kneel. I love this detail because obviously it's a game mechanic and no NPC is ever going to pick up their shoebox of memories and run off with their life. In Joel's world, however, someone might one day be begging for their life and genuinely meaning it, and he will never know, because the world has made him cold and he murders people even when they're sobbing for mercy. By extension, the player also finds a rhythm of denying mercy in the name of self-preservation. I really like the way the gameplay does that. Pair that with the gory kills and on-screen giblets, especially if you kill enemies with a nail bomb, and imagine the reality of Joel wandering without a care in the world past horrific scenes of violence he has inflicted. This is a man who has made peace with the realities of death long ago. Not only does Tess serve as Joel's morality buffer, but she fills the void of his motivation in the absence of anything else. Joel is initially extremely reluctant to smuggle Ellie out of the city. It's not specified why. It could be because there's added risk with a child involved, but I think we can all agree that it's because she reminds him too much of his daughter, a hurt that has hung over him for 20 years and would for 20 more. As we will learn, Joel will reject anything that forces him to confront any facet of himself, at least at first, so it would be out of character for him to agree to smuggle her. Ellie, Joel and Tess embark on their journey with enthusiasm. Tess is not only driven, but far more optimistic than Joel. They complement each other well, both in personality traits, but also in the way you see them matching dry humour, in every little joke and snarky jab and passing comment.
Ain't been out here in a while.
It's like we're on a date.
Well, I am the romantic type.
Got your ways.
Although Joel is a crotchety old man, he warms up in Tess's presence. Trust is implicit in their every behaviour. When facing hordes of Robert's men, the two share an intuitive back and forth. They truly are best friends, only the three end up getting held up by guards only minutes outside of the quarantine zone and are scanned for infection. Panicking, Ellie stabs the guard that scans her, a feat of initiative that would likely impress her cohorts, leaving Joel and Tess to shoot them. Only they notice that the scan reads infected for Ellie. The active to Joel's passive, Tess is awed by Ellie's immunity to the cordyceps infection. Initially holding her at gunpoint, Tess drops the stern facade almost immediately. Hearing tell of a potential vaccine, Joel is cynical, but you can see Tess truly believes it. It renews her enthusiasm, it's something to drive for. She and Ellie leave Joel alone in the frame by the Joel hole. Unless he commits to the mission that Tess has adopted without even needing the full details of, he will lose everything. So he goes. Tess is the perfect catalyst for Joel's journey. She's bitten on the trip to the Capitol building, the meeting place with the Fireflies, giving this a suicide mission vibe. With hours left to decide what she wants with the rest of her life, Tess decides that she wants her death to have meaning. Unlike Joel, who has nothing to lose in the sense that he had nothing to begin with, Tess has nothing to lose because these hours are a harrowing countdown. She's almost manic when she finds the dead bodies of the Fireflies. Although Joel insists, we're smarter than this, Tess is adamant. The proof is in the pudding. Ellie's scar is healed, and despite being bitten only an hour ago, Tessa's bite mark is blooming with black veins. In a line a few people have taken to mean that the two have a romantic past, Tess says, "There's enough here that you should do this for me." Personally, I didn't take this to imply a romantic connection. Certainly not a present-day one, at least. Maybe years ago, but not now. I think that a dying wish shouldn't be something to be begged for if they loved each other. It feels as though she's asking him to dredge up whatever they do have to justify action on his part. It takes his best friend's dying wish for Joel to take Ellie under his wing. A decision that causes him enormous pain from a wound that has festered for 20 years. In any other circumstances, he would not have been alone with this girl. As Joel and Ellie flee the overrun building, he calls her Ellie for the first time. Bill is another character the duo encounter on their journey. A ratty old recluse and certified sourpuss, Bill lives in the wonderful land of Billstown, previously Lincoln, Massachusetts, population 1. Joel warns Ellie very carefully not to piss this man off.
Now listen, Bill ain't exactly the most stable of individuals. So when we get there, you let me do the talking. You understand?
I understand.
You gotta be clear on this. He don't take too kindly to strangers.
All right.
Bill's a good guy. He just definitely needs some time warming up to you, so.
Bill is actually my favourite character. No, in case you were wondering, I did not like how they used him in the show, I won't spoil it, and that's because his character is not only eccentric and hilarious, but also because he is the perfect wall for Joel and Ellie to bounce off. Bill's place in this story allows the two of them to bond together over his weirdness, creating a situation in which they are immediately reliant upon each other. In the presence of Bill, Ellie and Joel cooperate like old friends.
Someone left a ladder on the bus. Here, get me up there and I'll drop it to you.
Don't get killed up there.
Thanks, Bill.
Bill is introduced after a wave defense section. Joel blunders into one of the traps and is yanked upside down and needs to cover Ellie while she cuts the counterweight, a huge fridge, loose. Rushing the pair in a gas mask he wears constantly whilst out on solo patrol, Bill makes very clear his irritation at having these two trespassers on his property. The themes in The Last of Us are represented by the people Joel and Ellie encounter, not them themselves. Both characters have enormous emotional and physical journeys to embark on, and it takes a lot of weight off their individual journeys to have other characters join this melting pot and facilitate that change for them, especially Joel. Joel is quite happy with his standard, he doesn't seek change, so Naughty Dog brings in his Christmas ghosts to show him the error of his ways. Bill's theme is shutting everyone out doesn't stop the hurt, it just forces you to cope with it alone. The thing about Bill that makes Joel so subconsciously uncomfortable is that Bill is the ghost of Christmas future to Joel's Ebenezer Scrooge. Bill is what Joel will become if he refuses to let people in. Bill is the end result of years of paranoia, mistrust, and ultimately fear. Bill is scared of losing people. He's been alone for a while now, so it's become easy for him, but anyone who's been through a breakup dreads that newly alone feeling, when silence rings in your ears and everything feels aimless and heavy.
Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing: getting you killed. So you know what I did? I wisened the fuck up. And I realized it's gotta be just me.
Bill, it ain't like that. It's
Bullshit. It is just like that.
Bill doesn't have someone to look after, because having someone to look after means that you have someone to lose. Joel is also acutely aware that having someone to look after means that you have something to lose. After Sarah, he has not opened up to another human being in 20 years for fear of suffering that loss again. His relationship with Tess was his closest, and their bond to me felt like old friends, kind of co-workers, like they're best friends, yes, but Joel clearly keeps his walls up. Bill also teaches Joel that you can't escape your past no matter how much you try. Bill makes reference to a partner who he no longer works with. It's only after the school section that they encounter that partner. Turns out it was a literal partner, Frank, who dumped Bill and tried to leave, only to wind up bitten. The trio find his hanging body later on, accompanied by a handwritten goodbye note. The note is not pleasant. You can choose whether or not to show this note to Bill, and whether that is an act of sadism or closure is entirely up to you, and he'll read it, bundle it up, and toss it. You can even pick it up again. Not only does this man find out his partner is dead, never even having escaped the Billstown perimeter, but he died hating Bill. No matter how much Bill shoved Frank's departure away, he ended up having to face it eventually. This is a lesson Joel will process much later in the game, but we see this mirror held up to him now. And this is why I was so angry with the show. The thing about Joel is, if he can't bring himself to open up again, he will be right back up on that lonely deck chair throne, killing clickers to stave off the boredom and playing chess by himself in a derelict dive bar.
Hey, you know how to play this?
Yeah, pretty badly, yeah.
I always wanted to learn.
Hey, Bobby Fischer, don't touch anything on that board.
Bobby, what?
Just let it go.
Bill isn't the only omen of misery that appears in Joel's path. Reassembling a car with Bill and driving off into the sunset, Joel and Ellie soon find themselves in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the infamous Pittsburgh Hotel, home of the second, and probably the scariest, bloater encounter. After a segment where Joel escapes the flooded hotel basement, he is set upon by some of the hordes of bandits that run this city. They begin to drown him and he struggles helplessly until Ellie shoots and kills them. This is Ellie's first kill, and Joel is horrified and angry. This manifests as pure ungratefulness. He snatches the pistol off her and scolds her for using it.
I feel sick.
And you just hang back like I told you to.
Well, you're glad I didn't, right?
I'm glad I didn't get my head blown off by a goddamn kid.
This is because Joel has projected his long-withheld fatherly instincts onto Ellie without even realising it. He has tried to remain emotionally separate, but this journey has taken a long time already, and he has grown to care about her without even realising it. With this, he feels as though he has personally failed her by ever ending up in a situation where she has to take a life. Ellie's first kill marks the first time Joel, in his eyes, has failed to protect her. Both Ellie and the player feel alienated by Joel at this moment. To get shouted at for saving someone's life is confusing and frustrating, but when you begin to understand that Joel is upset at himself, not at Ellie, it all unravels in your mind. Still, things are tense between them after that for a good period. Joel seething, Ellie agitated. Joel's refusal to just communicate with his daughter figure is a tale as old as time, and something she has no choice but to work around. Only when the pair of them arrive at their next altercation, a group of bandits that outnumber Joel, blocking their path to the next objective, he hands Ellie a rifle and tells her how to use it.
You stay here.
This is so stupid. We'd have more of a fucking chance if you let me help.
I am. You seem to know your way around a gun.
I sort of shot a rifle before, but it was at rats
Rats.
with BBs.
Well, it's the same basic concept.
This is a responsibility Ellie takes on with the kind of zest a kid would approach pushing the shopping cart with, awed by the opportunity to prove herself, and she does prove herself. Not on grounded difficulty though, that section of the game still took me well over an hour. Still, it's a step in the right direction. Joel's reluctance to let go of the safety net around Ellie arrives in perfect parallel with Sam and Henry, functionally Joel's ghost of Christmas present. Sam and Henry are two brothers. Sam is 12 and Henry is 25. They are the last two surviving members of their group, and although the two older men are ready to kill each other on sight, the insistence of protecting the innocence of their respective young charges saves them both.
Joel, stop! Look.
Ellie does not jump in on the beating, instead looking around the room and noticing a young boy who probably would have shot Joel dead if he was any older and any more jaded. When we consider that this game conditions you to kill NPCs who are begging for their life, it's almost unusual to meet characters who do not kill as a first instinct. Joel and Henry have lost that innocence.
Man, you hit hard.
Well, I was trying to kill you.
Sam and Ellie have kept it, thanks to their guardians.
All right, ready?
Ow.
A blueberry hurt you?
It's been a while since that boy even cracked a smile.
The theme of Sam and Henry is you can't protect people from death, but you can prepare them for it. The tragic lesson that Joel learns through this pair is that withholding reality withholds life. We catch a glimpse of Henry's extreme rules when we see Sam pick up a little robot toy. Henry makes Sam recite their rule out loud.
My backpack is practically empty.
What's the rule about taking stuff? It weighs like nothing. The rule. What is it?
We only take what we have to.
That's right.
And forces him to put it back. Fun fact, if you turn the camera back and forth a bunch, Ellie will snatch it off the floor when she thinks you aren't looking, planning to give it to Sam as a gift later. Although initially just coming off a bit strict, Henry's rules prove to be too constrictive. He doesn't trust his brother to defend himself, he doesn't trust his brother to act appropriately on instinct. He tries to save him from the world around them and ends up losing him. This happens after a clicker falls on Sam towards the end of a tower defense segment, as Joel must defend Ellie, Sam and Henry from pursuers. The clicker bites Sam on the leg. Sam, too ashamed to tell Henry what happened, turns into a cordyceps zombie in his room overnight. Henry doesn't take this development very well.
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault!
Henry! Henry, no!
Oh my God. You ready to see dear old brother?
I'm just ready to get there.
You nervous?
I don't know what I'm feeling.
While Bill teaches Joel to open up, lest he end up like him, Henry is a stark omen for Joel about what will happen if he cares too much. Joel lets this little girl into his heart, but the instinct then is to protect her from every little hardship that might cross her, something he felt he failed to do for Sarah. The Pittsburgh Hotel is indicative of that reluctance to let go. Watching Henry's iron grip over Sam still fail to protect him is all the proof Joel needs to understand that he needs to do his best, but his best will honestly never be enough. Henry preserved something that only served as a detriment to Sam, his innocence. Only by allowing Ellie to be her own person, to allow her to peek past the veil into the real world, to leave her innocence behind and become the killer he has been for decades, will she have any chance to survive. The innocence of his childhood is symbolised by the robot Ellie took. Although the bite took his life, her callous final words to him stole his hope. She carries his innocence with her for the rest of her life, keeping his robot toy in her room into the sequel. We'll discuss what she says to Sam later in the section where we talk about her, but keep this in mind for now. Joel's ghost of Christmas past is Tommy, his estranged brother. Ellie is very excited to meet him, but Joel awkwardly explains that their last words were not civil.
What happened between you two?
What do you mean?
You and Tommy. You're not together, so clearly something went down.
We just had a bit of a disagreement, that's all.
Yet, in a heartwarming display, the first thing the brothers do when they reunite is embrace, everything behind them forgiven. Unconditional love perseveres, and as Joel learns to let people in, he decides to let his brother back in. Obviously, friction will come when the honeymoon hour wears off, but it's sweet. This is a stark contrast from the Tommy we met in the prologue, whose first instinct was always to go straight to his big brother, who held a door so that his big brother could run, who shot and killed a soldier for his big brother. Joel is hesitant to explain where this animosity came from. When Ellie pushes for answers, he admits,
So what was it about?
Tommy saw the world one way, I saw it the other.
And that's why he joined the Fireflies.
Yeah, your friend Marlene promised him hope. That kept him busy for a while, but just like Tommy, he eventually quit that too.
This, combined with some later context clues, gives us a degree of insight into their relationship. Although Joel merely hints at their differences of opinion, it soon becomes apparent that the two of them disagreed on the necessity of killing. During another quote-unquote difference of opinion, Joel reminds Tommy that,
"This is how you gonna repay me, huh?
Repay you?
For all those goddamn years I took care of us."
Took care? That's what you call it? I got nothing but nightmares from those years.
You survived because of me.
It wasn't worth it.
This conversation between the two brothers is the most we'll ever learn about the kind of person Joel was before the story began. To think, his time as a hardened smuggler whose very name struck fear into the hearts of men was his twilight years, is to understand that Joel went to some very extreme lengths in the 2 decades since the outbreak. Tommy and Joel clearly diverge on the opinion on how necessary this was. The thing about this game is that you do not see enough outside of Joel's experience to know for sure which of them is right, but we do have some context clues that we can interpret to better understand more about that disagreement. For example, Tommy clearly understands that there is a necessity to killing. He's not a pacifist. When bandits attack the dam, he goes straight to killing. There's no bold illusion of making peace with the people. He kills people during this game. He was also a member of the Fireflies, so presumably took part in acts that some would consider to be terrorism. Yet somehow Joel's approach to killing is so starkly polarised from Tommy's already fairly liberal approach, is so extreme that it gave Tommy nightmares. Next is the more obvious fact: Tommy is still alive. Since splitting from his journey with Joel, Tommy has survived quite happily for years. Joel insists that sociopathic bandit behaviour is a necessity for survival in this new world, but Tommy is not only surviving, but also thriving, and this proves otherwise. How does Tommy survive without being a sociopath? With community. When we encountered Tommy, he has arrived at the dam near Jackson within the week. He and his team of people are working at getting the hydroelectric power plant working again, which they do manage to do. Just before Joel leaves for Colorado, he sees the place lit up like a little Christmas town. Joel calls Tommy's gang born again, snidely comparing their decision to work together and build something new to that of a born again Christian, like they've put their pasts aside and found faith, like their diversion from a bandit lifestyle is some kind of pious virtue signalling, doomed to fail, merely temporary. Still, they have, in a sense. They have found faith in each other. While Joel smuggled and stole and killed in the Boston quarantine zone, creating nothing but a ton of enemies and a stockpile of food and a military-run encampment full of police brutality and corruption, Tommy left to make something new for himself. See, Joel makes a mean remark about how Tommy joined the Fireflies but soon quit that too and left for something else. I think this is reflective of Joel's attitudes towards personal growth. Joel has clearly been doing the same things for the better part of 2 decades. He's found something that works and he is doing it, no matter how dangerous it is, no matter how corrupt or evil it is. Tommy was able to pull himself out of that hole and into the Fireflies. He worked with them for a bit, then found his wife Maria and adopted different goals. From the way Joel talks about this, he clearly sees this as some kind of inherent flakiness. Tommy changing direction every few years is an evolution. He grows and fits new spaces. He yearns for more. He dreams for a day where he can live, not just survive. By the time we meet him in The Last of Us, he has found that exactly. That's impressive. To Joel, this is some kind of character flaw, like Tommy has failed to commit to the person he was. Tommy has somehow failed by changing. Joel lived in stasis because stasis is stable. He was the passive half to the Tess duo, merely following her goals. Joel can't comprehend Tommy because he isn't capable of making his own goals. He just exists. Still, while Tommy disagrees with Joel on what he would consider to be necessary killing, he admits that Joel's approach has a time and place. Joel is 100% in on the cold stone killer thing. Tommy sees it as more of an occasional treat. He and Joel kill the bandits that attack the dam without regret. When he realises Ellie and Maria are in danger, Tommy says, "Joel, do your thing." Verbal permission to go the extra mile, Joel is often able to go when no one else can. Interestingly, this makes Joel's one-man army status canon. While initially a seamless part of the gameplay, obviously you need to be a one-man army to kill entire groups of aggressors, Tommy's verbal acknowledgement of this powerhouse brother codifies him as an anomaly. Joel is not just good at killing because it makes the game work, he is uniquely good at killing, canonically as part of his story. Tommy loves his brother and acknowledges his talents, but he has outgrown Joel in ways that Joel cannot yet comprehend. Tommy is also far more emotionally healthy than Joel. Of the two brothers, Tommy admits that he returned to Texas to see the homes they left behind all those years ago. Although Joel isn't going to announce, "I struggle to process the extent of my feelings and would rather never step out of my comfort zone even if it means I live half the life I could," it is implied by his response. Joel leaves his past behind him. In a previous scene where Ellie told Joel she needed to talk about Sam and Henry, he stops her with the assertion that exemplifies his outlook on trauma. Things happen and we move on. Sure, Joel. Things happened in Texas. That's a succinct way to describe it. As if to hammer this avoidance home, Tommy offers Joel a photo of him and Sarah. Joel rejects it immediately without even thinking. To even catch a glimpse of his feelings around his daughter 20 years on is such an open wound that he can't bear to let it breathe. Joel always ducks away before he can begin to process his feelings, so he never ever processes them, so they're always still hanging over him. Joel's rejection of the past comes hand in hand with his rejections of the future. Not only does Joel refuse to even acknowledge the presence of his photograph of Sarah, but Joel also prepares early for the moment he needs to brush aside losing Ellie. You notice that Tommy says, "I reckon you being here has something to do with that girl," and Joel responds, "It's got everything to do with that little girl." His instinct to protect her is at odds with his instinct to shove her away, so he never has to fail her like he failed Sarah. The truth of the matter is that at this point in his journey, he cares more about protecting himself than he cares about protecting her, and to do that he wants to send her away with Tommy.
Now, I'm not asking for much, Tommy. I just want some simple gear enough to set me on my way.
What makes you think I'd do this for you?
This isn't for me, Tommy. This is for your damn cause.
My cause is my family now. You ain't talking about some walk in the park here.
Jesus, boy. Have Maria get some of your born-again friends to do it.
They got families too.
Tommy, I need this.
He uses the excuse that Tommy knows the area better, Tommy knows the Fireflies, Tommy will be able to get her there and back. We all know it's bullshit, Ellie included. Joel merely wants to protect himself from the final handover and the true goodbye. Even at the thought of it, you see him wipe tears from his eyes. Still, Tommy says no at first until a bandit attack on the dam sees Joel and Ellie reunite.
Joel! Oh man, they were coming in from every direction, then Maria was like, "We gotta run," and so we dove over these tables and this huge guy blasted with a shotgun.
Slow down. Listen, hey, are you hurt?
No.
God damn it. I need to talk to you.
In this moment, you can see Tommy finally understand. Tommy isn't repaying Joel any debt. He's not agreeing to this to thank him for clearing the dam. Tommy is the only person who saw Joel and Sarah together, and in this moment you see him relive a memory. It's subtle, but he realizes that Joel needs this because he can't bring himself to lose another daughter. As the only living person on the planet who bore witness to Joel in the immediate days, weeks, and months after losing Sarah, Tommy uniquely understands what Joel went through. Combine that with the quickness of his decision, and we can divine that whatever Joel went through was so bad that Tommy, estranged as he is, would risk anything so as not to let him suffer it again. The problem is that Tommy is not a fighter. When you consider what Ellie and Joel eventually go through, it's likely that Tommy and Ellie by extension would both die on that journey. Maria, Tommy's wife, tells Joel that whatever happens to Tommy is Joel's fault. These words sit with Joel, and although they aren't necessarily what convinces him to change his mind, there is a part of him that knows he would be sending everyone he has left to an early grave.
What are you doing?
Your wife kind of scares me. I don't want her coming after me.
When writing The Last of Us, there was clearly a question that needed to be answered. Can we redeem an irredeemable character in the eyes of players so much so that they root for him? And the answer was yes. And one of the key ways, as explored here, was by fleshing him out so well and so selectively. The choices made in what to show and what to tell were carefully considered by a group of people who wanted you to know that Joel had been the villain in 1,000 different stories, but wanted you to see that he is a human being with his own trials and tribulations. Everything we're shown up until the final quarter of the game is a man whose violence is arguably wholly justified. Moreover, the characters he meets are reflections of himself that by comparison fail where he succeeds. Joel is a lone wolf, but Bill is a lonely wolf. Joel is a protective guardian, but Henry is a guardian who protected Sam in the wrong ways. Tommy is a survivor, but needs Joel in moments of survival. Although every character in this game is fleshed out extremely well, creating a cast that leaves an impression on you from the beginning, they're also carefully cultivated in such a way as to create situations that Joel passes by with minimum friction and often comes out ahead of, as the reason they made it. Although Joel tells us that he robbed people at gunpoint by pretending to be injured, and although Tommy tells him that his methods gave him nightmares and that survival wasn't worth it if Joel's approach was the cost, we never see it. And this is absolutely intentional because it puts us comfortably and quite happily into the backseat of a man who ultimately places himself above every single remaining human. Through this, we satisfy two of the requirements from the get-go. We have to like Joel more than we like the idea of the vaccine, and we have to believe that violence is just a means to an end for him. One thing I wanted to discuss about Joel as a person but struggled to find a place to slot this into was how Joel's basic personality aids us in relating to him and rooting for him. I think an audience is going to be more attuned to a person who behaves by their personal moral standards than they are going to consider things like hypothetical violence. Let me explain what I mean. Despite being a blue-collar worker born and raised in the rural outskirts of Austin, Texas in the 1970s, who did not attend any kind of higher education and with some implied religious beliefs that are not fleshed out by the story, Joel is surprisingly unproblematic. Sure, Texas is a mixed bag, and no, it's not a state of racists and bigots, but even as a man of his age, it's interesting that he has not one single tone-deaf comment to make about race, gender, sexuality, etc. Like, you can't convince me that a man from rural Texas growing up during the Cold War doesn't at least think Cosmo magazine as a communist sleeper cell. Although he is gruff and selfish and mean, Joel meets many of the expectations of a modern audience when it comes to personal politics and fundamental social morality. See, Joel does a lot of killing in The Last of Us. Not all of it is in the pursuit of self-defense. That said, murdering someone in cold blood in a fictional dystopian landscape is a hypothetical act we can only imagine, never mind describing morality to it based on context. There's a gulf the size of your mum between the average player and difficult choices made in insane fictional circumstances. We can say killing is wrong unless it's in self-defense, but true judgment is difficult to justify when events are occurring in the moment in a literal hypothetical situation outside of a society that we understand. There are 1,000 moving parts. Furthermore, killing is a fundamental mechanic in many games. Killing in a game isn't an act of murder, it is an act of removing pawns from the chessboard. In competitive games, deaths are more like tagging the other player out, strategic removals, point scoring, eliminations, and whatnot. The other player will eventually respawn and go again for many, many more games. Killing NPCs serves as the removal of obstacles for a player to continue traversing a game or story. In this way, killing within games has become so second nature to the player that for them to even play The Last of Us through, they need to be fine with it to the point of banality. The mere act of gaming as a hobby desensitizes players towards Joel's actions on a purely mechanical level. You might look at Joel shoot a man twice in the balls and go, ugh, but be real, you'll never be icked by that because as an action, it is just so fundamentally alien to you. That said, if he greeted Sam and Henry with the kind of slurs you'd have had to Google, it's categorically easier to imagine suddenly taking a dislike to him. And no, I'm not implying that people are overly sensitive if they're more put off by language than they are by killing. I'm suggesting that Joel earns the audience's respect because he aligns morally good on issues that they can relate to, but aligns morally bad on issues that we can only discuss as a hypothetical. Today's cultural standards are just that, a part of our culture, a swirling miasma of social rules and expectations that we abide by or not every day. Joel would alienate a player far more by suggesting that Ellie's destiny was in the kitchen than he would by taking a shotgun to the face of an NPC who has thrown down their weapon and is now begging for their life. This carefully assembled characterization falls in line with his carefully assembled history. We see Joel crying over the death of his daughter. We hear that he was a bandit for many years. One of them sticks far more fresh in your mind, affecting how you perceive his behaviors.
How did you know?
Know what?
About the ambush.
I've been on both sides.
Joel's behaviour is extremely subjective, both in terms of setting and in terms of audience. Firstly, it is impossible to know exactly what he has been through. Secondly, it is impossible to understand the true gravity of every situation he's in. It's a video game, so we know that Joel will make it through the sequence of events he's in some way or another. Joel doesn't know that. So when he takes extreme measures, it is because he expects extreme stakes, and there's no way anyone playing the game is going to ever understand what that means for Joel in that specific context. Every room he walks into is abundant with unknown variables that he can only assume will end in his death. We're separated from that by an abundance of factors, ranging from the physical separation and wider field of view of the third-person camera to the comfortable fact that we know we're playing a video game. I can look at Joel killing 2 men at Colorado's lakeside resort and I can say, he didn't need to kill those men. He could have broken their legs or tied them up so badly that they'd never get out without help. Because in this instance, he's not behaving in self-defense. He's behaving under the assumption that killing these men will save him trouble down the line, a preemptive measure, but that's not self-defense. That said, you play the game and you understand. Joel plays by a set of rules so far outside of normal society that they sit outside normal morality. Objectively, he's broken more laws than were ever put to paper, but subjectively he's a flawed human in an extreme situation. He broke the seal of killing long ago and has become something psychologically alien to anyone you'll meet in your day-to-day. The Last of Us relies on your affection and empathy for Joel to suspend your moral judgments, and it works.
Teamwork.
So, third of the 3 subjective factors, we have to feel as selfishly about Ellie as Joel does. Fun fact, the way I wrote this video was by watching the game through and taking constant notes. It's better to take too many notes than too few, in my opinion, just in case anything kind of creeps out at you later. And once I'd seen the game through, I did a quick look on Google for details you might have missed in The Last of Us, just to see if there were any very missable Joel and Ellie interactions or background details, or especially like conniving bits of foreshadowing. As always, the results were crammed full of AI-written dogshit and SEO-optimized clickbait, including this Game Rant article. It had a couple of interesting details, like the Irish pub reference to Uncharted and the eye chart posters that crop up in the finale, but the last 2 points of the countdown, where you would expect it to be ramping up to the coolest detail, were that Joel is 30 before the time skip and 50 after the time skip, and this means that some players may not have noticed his grey hair. Yeah, that was a hidden detail. And finally, the cherry on top coolest hidden detail you may not have noticed in The Last of Us, you can see Tessa's body after she sacrifices herself to give Joel and Ellie some time. Yes, after you walk through the double doors and up the stairs, the very precisely modelled overhanging mezzanine floor that looks directly down at the lobby below, and her perfectly scented corpse illuminated by light from the window, wearing a red shirt intended to be seen by the player, is a hidden detail. Sorry, I know I shouldn't expect Nobel Prize-winning observations from the likes of Screen Rant or Game Rant, but I really did think the bar would be set even moderately higher than this. Anyway, we'll carry on with this segment now, but God alive, that was a rough read. Ellie Williams is encountered shortly into the story. Joel wakes up in the Boston QZ 20 years after losing his daughter, goes to help Tess retrieve some stolen guns from a local crime lord, I say that with a huge question mark at the end, Robert, and meets the leader of the Fireflies, Marlene. Marlene has been gravely injured in a shootout with the local feds, her men are all dead, and she has an imminent problem. Ellie needs to be smuggled out of the city, and she has no one left to help her do it. The thing is, Marlene has the guns that Tess needs, and she has no use for them now, considering every member member of her squad is dead, so she extends an offer to Tess: smuggle this girl out and I'll give you the guns. Despite her role as a human MacGuffin, Ellie is anything but cargo. Her introductory scene involves her attacking Joel and Tess as they enter the apartment she's hiding in, believing she's saving them from Marlene. Ellie is a firecracker, but not in an annoying way. She's fearless and brash, but also maintains a cool and collected facade, which I think separates her from being an annoying, squeaky side character. She's also very curious, as we learn from the Left Behind DLC, a DLC I thought was okay, but broadly speaking didn't add that much. Ellie had spent her life in an orphanage since the death of her mother. While these orphanages are basically thinly veiled military farms, she's seen barely anything of the outside world. She has lots to ask, meaning she'll often prattle on even when Joel is walking in silence.
This tunnel, you use it to smuggle things?
Yep,
Like illegal things?
sometimes.
You ever smuggle a kid before?
No, that's a first.
Despite his hostility, she doesn't fear him at all. Circumstance forces the two together despite Joel's refusals to socialise. Tess wants to see the guns, to know they're real, but Marlene needs to go with her and they can't risk taking Ellie, so someone needs to be on babysitting duty. As I said before, Joel is the passive half of this partnership. Tess is driven, Tess does the legwork, Tess points at the goals, and Joel merely walks there. Since Joel doesn't want any part of this deal and doesn't care enough about the guns to pursue them, he's relegated to wait around while Tess does the verification. It's weird. As the player, we never see the guns. The big reward, the apparent snowball that starts this avalanche, the promised reward, we never see it. Tess isn't lying, obviously, it's just mad in hindsight how little this errand ever mattered, despite being the only reason this story ever happened. Ellie's not too happy about this agreement either. The two of them spend the entire walkover bitterly bickering between them. Joel is just some old curmudgeon to her and us at this point. I often wonder whether Tess knew about Sarah. She and Joel were close, they trusted each other with their lives. Tess is the only person in the world that Joel trusts, and the only person in the quarantine zone he'd do anything for without question. Would he have told her? Many people believe so, but I don't think we can say for sure. Maybe she had patches of it, maybe she inferred over time, maybe she didn't know at all. Depending on which theory you subscribe to, massively changes how you see her behaviour towards Joel when Ellie is brought onto the team. Tess reassures him that the girl is just cargo. Is she trying to separate Ellie from Joel's associations with Sarah and shield him from a bull rush of unresolved feelings? Or does she not know about Sarah at all, treating Ellie like a child because she thinks Joel hates kids or because she herself does? I know video essays are often expected to give solid answers, but this one's entirely up to you. At first, Joel can only bring himself to refer directly to Ellie in the most indirect way. Initially, he just calls her you. When they travel as a pair without Tess, Ellie becomes kid, acknowledging she is a child, but without any gender attached. Ellie's a good match for Joel. She challenges him, but she's also quick to inadvertently humanise him. He asks where her parents are, and she says they're gone, like everyone's. A truthful statement for an orphan raised amongst orphans during the apocalypse itself to say. Naturally, she can't know that many parents would have lost their children during the outbreak since she was never alive for it. Regardless, you can imagine that this throwaway comment sent Joel down memory lane. She draws the player's sympathetic attention to Joel here really effectively. When asked about her relationship with Marlene, the conversation goes about as well as you'd expect.
What's the deal with you and Marlene anyways?
I don't know. She's my friend, I guess.
Your friend, huh? You're friends with the leader of the Fireflies. What are you, like 12?
Ellie is a girl who simultaneously knows she is out of her depth, and a girl who wants to be in her depth. She speaks to Joel like an equal, despite his initial patronising comments, and you'll notice he drops them very quickly.
Look, I'm not supposed to tell you why you're smuggling me, if that's what you're getting at.
You wanna know the best thing about my job? I don't gotta know why. To be honest with you, I give two shits what you're up to.
Well, great.
Good.
If you pay attention to this scene, you might pick up on a particular hidden detail here. Joel actually lies down to go to sleep in this scene, a sneaky game rant reference to the fact that he is tired and it is quite late. Jokes aside, this scene is formative for their bond too. Joel wakes up the following morning and Ellie observes that he had been having a nightmare.
You mumble in your sleep. I hate bad dreams.
Yeah, me too.
I like this moment between them because Ellie's relative innocence initially means to him that she's talking about the kinds of bad dreams that teenagers have. He's not aware that she lost her best friend and first love only 3 weeks prior, and her nightmares are probably just as bad as the moment he relives when he closes his eyes. His "yeah, me too" is a comment that almost gives him respite. He agrees so blithely, it's like he doesn't even realise he's saying it. He finds a connection with her he probably doesn't even realise the potency of at this point, and it's just the sweet kind of way that parents acknowledge their kids' random announcements. I really like this moment between them. Ellie points out that his watch is broken, doubtlessly drawing, again, a very immediate hook into his memories of Sarah, fishing her back to the surface at a time when he likely never wants to think of her again. Ellie's presence forces Joel to think about things he has buried deep for 20 years, and try as he might, he cannot escape her. He could run out of this room right now and leave her, and she will probably be fine, but little does he know, his fatherly instincts are slotting right back into all the places he unplugged them from, and he stays here because it is the responsible thing to do. Ellie's observations of Joel's watch, and the fact that time for him stopped 20 years ago, also marks the moment where it begins again. Joel had nothing to live for 20 years, but whether he's aware or not, he now has something new to keep fighting for. Time has begun again for Joel, he just doesn't know it yet. I think the key ingredient to Ellie being quite a nice in-game companion is that she doesn't offer any friction to the gameplay itself. She can't alert enemies, meaning you don't lose sneaking sections to bugged AI, and she can even kill a few of them for you. In terms of storytelling and dialogue, I think Ellie works because her friction with Joel only comes about due to personality clashes. She never throws a fit about doing something or makes literally physically playing the game any harder. In that way, the player never builds any resentment when it comes to interfacing with the base mechanics. It's a small thing, but I think it really helps. As the story rolls on, Ellie proves herself obedient when it matters, nodding her head whenever commanded to do anything. She's also resourceful, impressing Tess with her story about infiltrating the mall, an area of the quarantine zone that's completely locked off. As much as Joel tries, he can't help but care. Little comments like, "come on kid," and "watch your step," confirm his attention and concern is on her, even if he pretends it isn't. It takes Joel less than a day to start crumbling under the weight of Ellie's effect on him. When she stops to admire the view, we see him glancing at his watch. He only does this 3 times in the game that I could see. When he gets it, obviously. He touches it absent-mindedly when later telling Ellie that she needs to find something to keep fighting for, and right now. Clearly this is a poignant moment for him. Ellie is vulnerable with the pair long before Joel.
Just so it's out there, I can't swim.
Look, it looks like it's shallow on the right side. Follow me.
I'm glad Marlene hired you guys.
What do you mean?
I know you guys are getting paid for this, but I'm trying to say thanks.
As they approach the Capitol building at long last, she divulges her secret. She can't swim. She never learned. Astute viewers and Game Rant fans will have noticed the hidden detail in this scene implied by Ellie's dialogue. That she can't swim. Now, just scroll past 8,000 adverts to the next hidden detail and we'll be on our way. Tessa's death has a huge impact on Ellie, one that follows her all the way to Salt Lake City where the game concludes. This is because Tessa's faith in Ellie is immediate. The second she learns that Ellie is immune, Tess is gung-ho inspired to get her to the Fireflies, instantly capable of believing in something bigger than herself. When she's bitten, this goes twofold. Tess becomes desperate.
Give me your arm. This was 3 weeks. I was bitten an hour ago and it's already worse. This is fucking real, Joel.
She wants her death to have meaning. In the grand scheme, she wants her death to be a stepping stone to a cured world. In the here and now, she meets the pursuers at the door and fights to her quick death, buying Joel and Ellie time. The impression Tess has on Ellie is almost possession, almost like Tess's spirit steps into her and joins for the ride. Immediately, Joel and Ellie sync up, communicating exactly the same way Joel and Tess did in the earlier chapters, left and right arms of one body connecting them.
All right, come on, Ellie.
There's this moment where they enter a subway full of spores and Joel's gas mask is on so fast I never even catch him doing it. Ellie, who has noticed danger ahead, grabs his hand and drags him aside. He looks at her in disbelief, asking how she is breathing in the spores.
How the hell are you breathing in this stuff?
I wasn't lying to you.
This moment stuns Joel, wiping his cynicism away on the spot. In this moment you can feel already, it's not just an obligation to Tess anymore. He is looking at this person for the first time and realising the fullness of the situation. It's not just a moment of belief, but it is a moment of connection and faith. Their faith in each other begins to grow here too. Ellie can't swim, so Joel has to ferry her around on floating pallets. As he does so, he mutters things like, "Be careful," and "I gotcha," as she wobbles, unsteady. The first area of the game the two are alone for is the outskirts of Billstown, home of Bill. This area area of the game is still roughly safe, being that it's heavily pruned by the ever-paranoid Bill, so it gives Joel and Ellie some breathing room to be silly and to get to know each other. Ellie's personality comes out here in full force.
Whoa, look. Fireflies. I mean, real fireflies.
Yeah, I see that. Are you all right?
I'm trying to learn how to whistle.
You don't know how to whistle.
Well, does it sound like I know how to whistle? Hey, look! Gnomes.
Yeah, those are gnomes.
Man, I had an art book filled with these. I always thought they were super cute. Not fairies, though. They creep me out.
All right, then. Would you play this before?
No. But I had a friend that knew everything about this game. Apparently, there's this character called Angel Knives who'd... what was it? She'd punch a hole through your stomach before kicking your head off.
I was never a big fan of these things.
Jesus.
Whoa, Nelly.
The extra time and effort spent characterizing Ellie is unheard of in video games, but pays off in dividends. Comparing The Last of Us and the original Resident Evil 4, it's like putting legend to legend, but comparing Ellie and Joel versus Ashley and Leon has a vastly different gulf. I like Leon, and I like Ashley, and I like their moments, but their relationship is different to Joel and Ellie, both because it's one of professionalism, but because Leon and Ashley lacked this volume of extra comments made back and forth, limiting their ability to get to know one another and the audience's ability to, root for the bond. This downtime spent with Ellie familiarizes you with her interests, like gnomes and arcade games. It demonstrates how impressed she is by things Joel considers mundane, fireflies and tripwires, and somewhat linked to that third point, she can't whistle, which Joel cannot believe. There's an innocence to Ellie that manifests itself in any facet of her personality, but also allows her to feel levity and enjoy the little things even when surrounded by death. And I think this really throws Joel off guard. There's something to preserve here, something to fight for, and he instinctively begins to grapple onto it. I think it's something the player instinctively begins to root for too. This area of the game is full of optional comments, observations Ellie will make while exploring nooks and crannies, and you'll find yourself wandering around the map looking for anything for her to comment on, just to see what she says. Wanting to protect Ellie's innocence works hand in hand with Joel's bullish refusal to process any emotion, because he can blame it on her when he doesn't feel like talking, saying he's doing it to keep her from being traumatized. When Ellie tries to talk to him about Tessa's death, he tells her,
Hey, look, about Tess. I don't even know what
Here's how this thing's gonna play out. You don't bring up Tess. Ever. Matter of fact, we just keep our histories to ourselves. Secondly, don't tell anybody about your condition. They think you're crazy, they'll try to kill you. And lastly, you do what I say when I say it. We clear?
Sure.
Repeat it.
What you say goes.
Even when she agrees, he's still grumbling to himself like he had an argument prepared. Still, Ellie proves herself to be a valuable travel companion.
Oh, shit. It's jammed from the other side.
Here, boost me up.
No, that's not such a good idea.
Well, I can't boost you up. How else are we gonna open it?
No, just open it. Nothing else.
Okay. Ta-da!
Good job. All right.
Cool. Shit, you're gonna go in there?
I want to see what we can find.
You're gonna find my body when I die from a heart attack.
You'll notice that I'm showing much more than I'm telling in this segment of the video, and that's because A, if I misquote a single one of these moments, you will never let me forget it, you goblins. And B, it's because these moments between Joel and Ellie aren't merely evident in the black and white words they say to one another. It's their tone, their body languages, the pauses between words, the context of what they're saying. I can only prove to you how well this works by showing you how well it's working. By the time Joel puts his big foot in a rope trap and ends up hanging helplessly a few feet above the ground, entirely reliant on Ellie to cut him loose, he is able to keep his cool and wholeheartedly put his trust in her. Shouting things like, "Come on, you can do it," Joel begins to shout at the swarming enemies to attack him instead.
Hey, time, Ellie.
Hold on.
You all right?
Yeah.
Come on, you can do it.
Well done, Naughty Dog. You constructed believable fatherly love across like 2 chapters. Not only does Bill serve as a foil only to Joel, but as I said before, he's just weird and insular enough that he puts himself on one side of the dividing line and Joel and Ellie on the other. His presence eliminates any differences between them from the word go, firmly aligning them as members of the same team.
Thanks for the heroics and all. Ellie. Hey, what are you... Joel?
Bill!
What are you doing?
Bill! Turn around and get on your knees. I see so much as a trick. Ow! Stop! Who the fuck is this punk and what's she doing here?
I am none of your goddamn business, and we're here because you owe Joel some favors. And you can start by taking these off.
Although Joel makes clear to Ellie in a prior scene that she shut up and let him do the talking because Bill is a bit of an oddball, this goes out the window here, but in a delightful and kind of harmless way. She gets free of her restraints and hits Bill with the pipe he handcuffed her to. Ellie immediately starts running her mouth, telling Bill she is none of his goddamn business and that he owes Joel some favors. And you can see the way Joel completely wilts, like she's just laying out all their cards on the table and there's nothing he can do. Like when your kid loudly asks why someone is so ugly and everyone turns and looks at you. Despite Ellie's feistiness, she never interferes with gameplay, which keeps the experience running smoothly while also allowing you to enjoy her friction with the world around her. She and Bill immediately dislike one another. She's like an angry little hamster in his presence. What I love about Bill, as president of the Bill fan club, is that despite the friction and the arguing and all the fat jokes Ellie makes,
Whole goddamn town's booby trapped. Best stay right on my ass.
Can't miss it.
Knock it off.
he is a reasonably good sport. Joel shows up, tells him he needs his help right now with something very difficult, and Bill complains, but he does it immediately and without question. He's a real boy. I wonder what happens to him after this game. I wish he stayed in touch. Sorry he doesn't have a thigh gap, Ellie. He's a survivor, okay? I like one moment where Bill asks Joel where Tess is. Joel's like, "Oh yeah, she ain't coming today," and the thought that she might have died never crosses Bill's mind. He makes a snide comment about trouble in paradise, and then leaves it, as disinterested in discussing personal problems as Joel is. Ellie and Bill's adversarial professional relationship allows the writing team to seal up any plot holes an audience might raise whilst entertaining the player. When Ellie asks why it's not possible to fill up any car on the street, Bill responds surprisingly comprehensively.
So, why don't you fix one of these cars?
Oh my god, you're a genius. I mean, the whole time, why on earth hadn't I thought about fixing one of these cars?
Okay, don't be a dick.
Their tires are rotted and their batteries are dead.
He's just generally angry, often interrupting quieter moments to throw his weight around. But the game never makes you feel bullied for it. He's antagonistic, but present and helpful, not interested in dominating the situation, but merely sitting in the back, enjoying just bitching and moaning for the better part of his segment of the game. He's harmless, especially when Ellie finds his stash of porn, some gay magazines called things like Hard as a Rock Cafe or something, I don't remember exactly. But she's giggling and Joel is super awkward about it. Bill becomes the emperor with no clothes, like they're forced to take him seriously because he's capable helping them, but they also have a private giggle over it together.
Oh, I'm sure your friend will be missing this tonight. It's light on the reading, but it's got some interesting photos.
Now, Ellie, that ain't for kids.
Whoa! How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of that.
Well, hold your horses. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Oh, why are these all stuck together?
And if you watch the show, you miss all of this development, so fuck me, I guess. Even by the last episode of that show, I felt like Joel and Ellie barely knew a thing about each other. Ellie proves herself to be a capable and entertaining ally to Joel and the player. The first time he tells her good job is when she gets in the car they've fixed up, ready to drive away.
Try to get some sleep. Right.
I'm not even tired.
Turns out Billstown is to Pittsburgh what a soft play area is to a prison yard. While Billstown features a ton of segments where Ellie learns on the job what it means to survive in a world like this, Pittsburgh is the crucible in which she is made. Those skills and that quick decision making is put to the true test. Aw, baby's first kill. As we've discussed, this is where she kills for the first time, marking both her ascension into the real world and Joel's perceived failure to save her from ever needing to. This is just before the duo meets Sam and Henry. When Joel is fallen upon by a stranger, Ellie shoots the stranger. When Henry is fallen upon by a stranger, Sam doesn't. This parallel between the kids isn't something the game draws a lot of attention to, but when you put them side by side, you realise how these situations were more or less identical. But Ellie has been raised with trust and honesty, and Sam is constricted and shielded from the difficulties of reality by his helicopter guardian Henry. Sam is a milestone for Ellie, an implied bar she needs to reach before continuing her journey. Moreover, Game Rant Sopranos may notice a few hidden details in these scenes, namely, Sam and Henry are brothers. Yep, save that one for your Viggo Mortensen trivia moment. Let me know in the comments which Game Rant hidden details you noticed while playing The Last of Us. After an altercation that sees Joel and Ellie abandoned by Sam and Henry, specifically Joel, who has been left stranded under a broken ladder, Ellie jumps down to be with him regardless of whether it means the two are imminently torn to shreds by machine gun fire. When I saw this, I audibly squealed, and you can see the impact this gesture has on Joel too. It's quite an impressive gesture. Like, Ellie is loyal enough to run into trouble just to keep Joel company. Minutes later, when Ellie takes a leap of faith into rushing waters, Joel jumps with her. While Joel stays fairly static in terms of combat expertise and PTSD fuel experiences across the length of this game, Ellie's growth oscillates between moments of downtime and moments of action. Joel's story is about becoming stronger emotionally, but Ellie's story is about becoming fit to live in the world that she has been flung into. Every time Ellie reaches a new altercation, she is tested slightly more. Every time she reaches a new challenge, she needs to use what she has learned from Joel and the world around her to overcome that challenge. In the downtime between those challenges, she gets to learn about the world and enjoy her relative innocence under the watchful eye of her guardian.
What is this?
Oh, this is an ice cream truck.
An ice cream truck?
Yeah, Henry told me about these. They sell ice cream out of the truck.
What? No way. Joel?
That's true. This thing would drive around and play real loud, creepy music, and kids would come running out to buy ice cream.
You're totally fucking with me.
Serious.
Man, you lived in a strange time.
Told you so.
To put it bluntly, her downtime teaches her what she could be living for, and her moments of action teach her how to survive to enjoy it. Ellie's effect on Joel and the player are inherent across each moment. When Joel picks up in-game collectible comics, he starts to remark, "I bet Ellie would like this," demonstrating how much her happiness and well-being is on his mind at all times, how he wants to bring her things she'd like. In action moments, we start to see how terrified Joel is whenever Ellie is not directly with him. During playable combat, if you take cover, Joel will physically shield Ellie by standing over her. That's fucking adorable. But moreover, we see it in the way he speaks. He never needs to worry about Ellie getting infected from bites, but he does need to worry about her getting torn to shreds, which is a valid concern for a father, I think. Still, this modicum of safety rubs off on Ellie too, who forgets to understand how relatively lucky she is. Ellie will never have to know the desperate fear of turning into an infected. Not only dying, but dying in a thus far alien way. The panic of wondering if you'll still be aware as it takes hold of you, which may be true considering some stages of infection still cry and beg for help. The panic of wondering how dangerous you're about to become to your loved ones. The panic of feeling your humanity slip away and desperately clawing for the time left. Ellie is, by the standards of The Last of Us, immune to an unfortunately common and miserably real facet of the human experience, and she forgets to care. Sam is bitten on the leg during the sniper segment of the game when a clicker falls on him. Too scared to tell Henry, he withdraws into himself and goes to take stock of the food they found in the adjacent room of the apartment the four camp out in. While Joel and Henry bond over Harley motorcycles, Ellie goes to speak to her typically peppy buddy and finds him cold and miserable. Initially, this seems to be because Sam is bitter at the way Henry coddles him.
Did Henry send you?
No. Why would Henry send me?
To make sure I'm not fucking up somehow.
Eager to talk some cheeriness back into him, Ellie starts, for lack of a better term, running her mouth. Being infected is just a hypothetical to her, but it's a very human possibility for everyone else, meaning discussions of it are to be handled gently at the best of times. Not realising that Sam is infected goes quadruple for that rule, but Ellie is so blasé that she tramples like an elephant all over the conversation. Even if he wasn't infected, this would be a tough listen.
I'm scared of ending up alone.
What if the people are still inside? What if they're trapped in there without any control of their body? I'm scared of that happening to me.
They might still look like people, but that person is not in there anymore.
Henry says that they've moved on, that they're with their families, like in heaven. Do you think that's true?
I go back and forth. I mean, I'd like to believe it.
But you don't.
I guess not.
Yeah. Me neither.
The thing Ellie doesn't realise is that the fear of becoming infected is the fear of being alone, personified and magnified 1000%. If there's even a chance you're still in there after you turn, you are truly alone. Unable to communicate with your cliquey brethren, you're abandoned by society and community. You can't stop yourself from attacking people you love, forcing them to hurt you in return, and hurting them in the process. No one will ever come near you again. To compound this, Ellie's observations on heaven are something she comes to massively regret. It's this interaction with Sam that teaches her that anyone's night could be their last, and it's better to talk and act with hope than it is to let people die in fear and misery. This echoes a similar lesson Joel learns when in Pittsburgh. Initially happy to assume that all her friends are dead and to voice that assumption, by this point in the game Joel is very careful to phrase things so as not to destroy her resolve.
I stayed at a place like this, back in the Boston QZ.
Military preparatory school.
Yeah, nice way of saying orphanage. I wonder what happened to all these kids.
Well, this place has been out for a good stretch. They ain't kids no more.
Meaning they're either hunters trying to kill us, or they're dead.
Or they got away.
But you don't believe that.
I believe in getting out of this city. Come on.
Ellie gives Sam the robot she picked up for him in this scene and leaves with a reassurance that goes twofold for the toy and the bite on his leg. If Henry doesn't know about it, he can't take it away. Sam looks at the robot uselessly. Likely it all feels so meaningless now. Sam's innocence was ripped away from him that day, and in the hours leading to his death, it's basically an alien prop to him. Ellie regrets Sam's last few hours for a long time after this. It's a lesson for her, and from this point on she is more introspective and far more considerate. Ellie's not exactly living the high life, but she will never need to know the fear of losing herself to the cordyceps infection. Ellie barely sees Tommy because her arrival at the dam means she has to go and hang out with his wife, Maria. This means she misses the brotherly negotiations on who has to take her to Colorado. When she figures out the source of their tension, understanding why Tommy is so upset and Joel is so on edge, she takes flight on horseback and runs to hide in a ranch a little way away. Joel finds her here, marking the turning point in their relationship. Finally. There's not much I have to say about this scene that isn't laid out clearly in the dialogue. It's probably the most overt this game's dialogue will ever be, but I didn't want anyone to think I had intentionally left it out or forgotten to include it. It's really important. It's also just really self-evident as to what this conversation is the culmination of. You don't need me to tell you, but I will, just so you don't think I forgot. Ellie felt as though the two were beginning to care for one another, and she is extremely hurt that Joel is essentially abandoning her for the last leg of her trip. Like, he doesn't get to be there just for the good bits and then sit in a waiting room while the sad stuff happens. Joel cannot say goodbye to Ellie, so he wants the decision to be made for him. But she never had a father, and he taught her how it feels to have one. He is her guardian, and he knows it. Joel continues to hide this fear of losing her behind excuses of Tommy knowing the land. When she calls him out on it, he pivots to guilt-tripping her by accusing her of not understanding her own worth. Ellie insists that she is not Sarah, earning herself the angriest response I have ever seen. Joel, emotions still completely raw and unprocessed, accuses her of not knowing true loss, highlighting how, even 20 years on, it is still a wound so raw that Joel considers his experience to be truly unique and impossible to understand nor measure up to. This reminder also fills Joel with feelings of guilt. His "you're not my daughter and I am not your dad" is something he's saying to himself, not Ellie. The feelings of shame cause him to put those walls up again. He is reminding himself that this girl is not his blood. He feels stupid and vulnerable for having an emotional investment, so he shoves her away when she needs him most. Still, Ellie's assertion that she'd be more scared with anyone else reaffirms his belief that he is the best man for the job, and to trust her with anyone else would be to put her in the hands of someone less capable. Thankfully, he changes his tune.
University, Eastern Colorado. How do I find this lab?
It's in the science building. Looks like a giant mirror. You can't miss it.
Take care of that wife of yours.
There's a place for you here, you know?
You good?
I'm good.
Adios, little brother.
Later, when searching for the Fireflies at the University of Colorado, after all that mess with Tommy at the dam, Joel, at long last, embraces fatherhood again. That's right folks, his walls are down. They have found a family unit within themselves. This is a long-awaited moment for any player. This will have you squirming in your seat. It's so cute and it's so nice to see the pair of them happy. Depending on your time spent exploring and reading notes and your difficulty setting, it might be a long time before you find yourself here, so it is so worth it. Before, Joel had this intentionally detached attitude, like how people used to wait until their children were past infancy to name them in case they died, so they wouldn't get too attached. Ellie has overcome her developmental infancy, as such, and Joel commits. The University of Colorado segment is fairly short, but the importance of this moment is in what it teaches Ellie. Raised in a military-run orphanage, I can only assume that Ellie was raised with strict goals and expectations in mind. Presumably, everyone in Ellie's orphanage would be expected to join straight into the military, and to walk away from that and cross the United States must have felt like leaving an entire future behind. Here, Ellie asks what a university was for, and Joel answers.
So, these places, people would live here and just study, even though they were all grown up?
Study, party, and find themselves. Figure out what they wanted to do with their lives.
What they wanted to do with their lives.
Ellie repeats this to herself, amazed. Her childhood is barely discussed in this game, but I imagine the concept of still having choice and opportunity as a late teenager would be a surprise to her.
Have you ever been to one of these?
What, university?
Yeah.
No, not as a student, at least.
Why not?
I had Sarah when I was pretty young.
It's here that Joel admits he wanted to be a singer, much to Ellie's amusement.
What about you? What'd you want to be?
Well, when I was a kid, I used to want to be a singer.
Shut up.
I'm serious.
Sing something.
No.
These moments are short, and the university is mainly Where Are the Fireflies plot shenanigans and some of the best and most memorable combat segments in the game, but the university segment is so core to Ellie's character development because it teaches her that there is a whole life ahead of her she is allowed to enjoy, should she wish. She hasn't had her chance and failed it by leaving the military orphanage, and her only destiny in life isn't to sacrifice herself for humanity. This moment teaches Ellie that she can do and be whatever she wants, a sentiment that she genuinely has never known before. Parents worry, stranger danger is a thing, and is there anyone worse out there for you to worry your young children will encounter than a paedophile cannibal with a machete? Joel is skewered by a big rusty pipe when falling from a height at the University of Colorado. For the first time in the game, everything is on Ellie. This is one big midterm exam to see what she's learned, and she passes it with flying colours.
What do you want me to do?
Move.
What?
Move!
Here.
Let's get to the damn horse.
Joel? How are we doing?
Fine. I see you.
The kid's got a gun! Who's out? Hey!
Oh, shit. Oh, shit.
You little shit!
Oh. Joel. Here, stand up.
Still, it's not over. Joel has been impaled, and that's not something you walk off. After a time skip, we play as Ellie out in the snowy mountains of Colorado hunting alone. The dialogue is tricky here because it implies Joel has died, but I spoiled the ending of this game in the introduction of this video, and I won't be playing along with this game's lies. Our first time stepping into Ellie's shoes gives us a brand new perspective on her we've never seen. We look at her backpack contents, the photo of Joel and Sarah she never gave him, a goodbye letter from her mother who died a day after she was born and left her in the care of Marlene, Sam's robot, her Walkman, and a few other bits and pieces. Not only has the game come full loop for Ellie, who is now in her baptism by fire era, putting into practice everything she has ever learned from Joel, but the game comes full loop for a player who has spent all this time caring for Ellie through Joel as a proxy. Now we care for Ellie by being Ellie, the same way a baby bird learns to fly by jumping out of the nest. And that's perfect, because Ellie is about to run into the manifestation of Satan himself. David is a soft-spoken man and leader of a local gang of survivors, holed up in a makeshift settlement in the mountains. He encounters Ellie when he finds the deer she has hunted and asks to make a trade. Ellie has grown so much in the last year. I truly think that Day 1 Ellie would have gone wherever this man suggested, cracking jokes all the while. Day 1 Ellie was pliable and innocent, two traits ripe for exploitation in any setting, infected apocalypse aside. Day 200 Ellie, or wherever we are in this timeline specifically, demands a trade for the deer. Antibiotics. And no, Buddy Boy can go and fetch the them while she waits with David, and David can give her the rifle. Buddy Boy will be a while, so she allows David to sit in the shelter out of the cold. David asks her polite questions and she snubs him, while old Ellie would have sucked this up. David isn't so much a mirror for Ellie as he is a mirrored Joel for Ellie. Any man could have extracted Ellie from that QZ and taken her here. Any man in that wasteland could be David. Any man in that wasteland could be Tommy. Any man in that wasteland could be Joel. And lucky for Ellie, it was. David represents the infinite possibility of the people who claim to want to protect her. David is far kinder than Joel, shows much more mercy, and that's because he wants to earn her trust and abuse her. Meeting him at this stage, at the crest of her character development, means that Ellie is well prepared to expect and prevent it. What I love about the way these two characters are brought together is the way they are forced to cooperate. Ellie and David have to do leg ups the same way she and Joel did. Ellie drops ladders for David and he carries them around the same way Joel would. It's a jarring mirror of the emotional relationship she has with Joel, expressed through the way the mechanics are functionally flipped. Moreover, Ellie takes on the role as the primary combat person just as Joel did, using the same tools as he possessed to dispatch enemies. David takes on a kind of pseudo-Ellie role, basically running interference or punching infected so hard they sometimes die on lower difficulties. This serves two purposes. Firstly, obviously we can't have David rushing the place like John Wick, because that would take all the fun out of playing Ellie. He's relegated to stunning enemies so that you can kill them and staying out of the way so that you can have fun. Fair enough. Secondly, Ellie's canonically better combat skills means that she has literally outgrown him already. She has reached David and she is already better than him, both physically and emotionally. Day one Ellie would have relied on David for physical protection and likely would have imprinted on him like a baby bird. If she was cracking jokes, he'd certainly be laughing at them more than Joel did, but this is done with particular ends in mind. When he reveals he knew who she was all along and that his men want her dead, he offers her protection if she would only join him. Our Ellie doesn't need that. She lures them away from basement-bound Joel after administering the antibiotic that would save his life, and rides her horse away until it's shot out from underneath her. David may be worse at combat, but he's lived in these mountains long enough to be a far better hunter, predator in name, predator in nature. Our kitty snatcher does what he does best.
Relax. Keeping you alive here. There you go. There you go.
Although Ellie could beat this man in combat easily, and later will do, having been through countless combat conflicts with Joel in the year they spent together, she knows how to deal with fighting. David's predation is one thing Joel never had, never showed her, and therefore one thing he never could have prepared her to face. David and his people have been pushed to cannibalism, as Ellie sees when she comes to. The cannibalism is interesting because it represents a certain depravity and loss of humanity that David is about to offer Ellie on two fronts, if you catch my drift. He gives her a plate of beanie weenies, and she suspiciously asks if it's human meat. It's deer, David reassures her, a sentiment confirmed by Nolan North after the fact, and I believe him. I think it is deer. I think David offers her one thing while she still has the will to fight it. Protection, comfort, deer. But once she is trapped with him and isolated, the tables will turn. His men submitted to cannibalism under threat of starvation and death. It was human meat or nothing. Ellie's offer will also come with a threat of death or submission.
Convince him of what?
That you can come around. You have heart. You're loyal. And you're special.
Oh.
There's this one exchange in this scene that I love when David accuses Ellie of killing loads of his men. Ellie's like, we didn't have a choice. And David goes, do you think we didn't have a choice? Brother, your men attacked Joel and Ellie unprovoked with 0 attempts to parley first for fun. Joel and Ellie had only their backpacks, meager pickings for an entire community of people. Do you think we didn't have a choice? A choice to what, David? Shut up. For God's sake, you are embarrassing yourself. David offers Ellie a way out. She just needs to submit to him. Unbreakable, she breaks his fingers. To cut a long story short, Joel will arrive too late to save Ellie, because she has saved herself. After a ton of running and fighting, her character growth peaks alongside the conclusion of her very own solo boss fight. This boss fight, especially on higher difficulties, is tense. It is actually quite scary. You, a terrified young girl, are stalked through this warm little family restaurant as it slowly goes up in flames. If you step on a patch of splintered plates and make noise, your pursuer will know exactly where you are and will creep ever closer. He hunts Ellie like an animal. To overcome him, you need to hunt him back, misdirecting him with thrown items and stalking him with listening mode. The fight concludes with David pinning her down, welcoming her to beg, telling her she has no idea what he's capable of. This traumatizes Ellie more than any infected ever could.
Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
Okay, it's me. It's me. It's me. Look, look. It's me.
He tried to...
Oh, baby girl. It's okay. It's okay.
Joel.
It's okay.
Actually, side note, I really hate the way this boss fight is, quote-unquote, reflected in The Last of Us 2. Abby, a woman who did a bad thing to Ellie, gets hunted by Ellie in exactly the same way Ellie was hunted by David, to suggest that Ellie is now evil because she wants revenge. Sorry, but this is absolutely apples and oranges. David stalks Ellie through the furniture of the restaurant because he is inhuman. He is a predator who cannibalizes human beings and the wills and bodies of young girls. What are we possibly suggesting by juxtaposing him with a girl who very narrowly escaped being his victim? I just can't fucking... Salt Lake City and the hospital are the culmination of Ellie and Joel as human beings, especially Ellie. It contains a flurry of moments that call back to every aspect of their development.
Look at that. Another city, another abandoned quarantine zone.
That's right, Joel. The story may be bookended by the civilized society of pre-apocalypse Texas and the rebuilt Jackson with its hydroelectric power plant, but our game is bookended by quarantine zones. It's also bookended by nicknames. Where Ellie was Kid in the Boston QZ, she is now Kiddo. A subtle difference in wording, but a lifetime of difference in meaning. We return to the typical Joel-Ellie gameplay, only now Ellie's lingering trauma means she sits quietly on benches, makes no jokes or silly comments, and lags quietly behind Joel as she explores. When he goes to give her a leg up, an animation we'll have seen tens of times by now, Ellie doesn't come over.
Here we go. Ellie? Ellie?
What?
The ladder.
It's not all bad though. Previously having nothing to live for except her own noble death, Ellie now has things she wants to see and try. Joel reassures her that once we're done with this, I'll teach you how to play guitar. She sees her first ever giraffe, a herd of which now wanders freely through the plains of Salt Lake City, and discovers natural beauty and wonder even in the saddest, most ruined places.
So, was that everything? Is everything you were hoping for?
It's got its ups and downs. But man, can't deny that view. Can't deny the view though. Come on.
While Sarah was once a complete no-fly zone for Joel's emotions, he now allows Ellie to ask a couple of questions.
Is that after you lost Sarah?
Yes, it was.
I can't imagine losing someone you love like that. Losing everything that you know. I'm sorry, Joel.
That's okay, Ellie.
After their short chat, Ellie will give you the photo she's been keeping of Joel and Sarah, and Joel's emotional journey will find a peaceful conclusion.
Here. Maria showed this to me and I stole it. I hope you don't mind.
Well, no matter how hard you try, I guess you can't escape your past. Thank you.
The two of them rejoice in the fact that their journey is almost over and make excited plans for what they'll do with their lives once they're able to return to Jackson and Uncle Tommy.
But there's no halfway with this. Once we're done, we'll go wherever you want. Okay?
Well, I ain't leaving without you. So let's go wrap this up.
Not so. We'll expand on this in a million different ways in a moment, so let's just quickfire recap. Joel and Ellie fall into rapids under the city. Ellie almost drowns. Joel pulls her out of the water and begins doing CPR. Fireflies see them and approach. Joel begs for help, unarmed, and they knock him out. Joel wakes up in a hospital bed with Marlene and an unnamed guard. Marlene tells him that Ellie is going into surgery and the surgery will kill her. Joel kicks up a mild fuss and is escorted out by a guard who goads and humiliates him. Joel kills the guard and storms the hospital. Joel kills the surgeon about to perform Ellie's surgery. In a perfect mirror image to the prologue, he carries Ellie to safety. He kills Marlene on the way out, ending the Fireflies once and for all. Ellie wakes up in a car. Joel gives her his cover story for why they're gone. She clearly doesn't believe him. As they stop outside of Jackson on the precipice of their new life, Ellie asks Joel to be honest with her one last time. Is what he said about the Fireflies true? That they had so many immune volunteers that they didn't need her anymore and sent her home in her hospital gown? Joel says,
I swear.
Okay.
and the game ends. Joel being knocked unconscious at the start of this segment seems to come out of left field initially. He's armed, sure, but he's sitting over Ellie trying to bring her back from the precipice of drowning. When the Fireflies approach him, weapons drawn, he responds by begging them to help. They respond by knocking him unconscious in an act of, at best, bizarre overcaution and at worst, wanton cruelty. But there's a reason for this. Joel and Ellie both being unconscious serves the story specifically because it means there is no one there to advocate for Ellie. Ellie is never woken up by the doctors, who keep her unconscious so that they can run a lot of tests on her to figure out where her immunity comes from. Because Joel is unconscious, he is unaware of any consent she has or has not given. If he was able to say goodbye, he would be able to sit by her and ask her if this is what she wants. Him being unconscious eliminates this. If Ellie were to have consented, Joel's murder of the hospital staff and Marlene would be selfish and purely evil, ignoring a young girl's wishes for his own selfish ends. If Ellie did not consent, Joel's actions would have made him morally good, saving a young girl who was about to be killed from a selfish evil group of scientists who would rather pursue their own god complex than respect that no means no, and they will merely have to wait for another immune subject. Ellie not consenting, to our knowledge, removes that moral dial. It is impossible for Joel to know for sure, and therefore this factor is perfectly positioned so as to justify her emancipation on that grounds. Fundamentally, does Ellie want to die? We don't know. And no one has asked her, so Joel goes and saves her. But there's more to her consent than just that. Ellie's age serves two purposes here as well. While yes, Ellie being 14 serves a central purpose of her being a similar age to Sarah, the daughter Joel lost, and therefore giving him a more desperate, grasping reason not to lose that again, it also serves a function of dubiously informed consent. Across the course of the game, Ellie proves herself to be bright, resourceful, and above all, curious.
What is this?
Oh, this is an ice cream truck.
An ice cream truck?
Ellie has a life ahead of her that she is excited to live. Compared with the grumpy, cynical Joel, who implies in a bit of missable dialogue in the Pittsburgh hotel that he goes on simply because it is harder to stop than just let life wash over him one miserable day at a time, Ellie finds things she loves. She collects comics, tells the worst, cheesiest jokes from books she finds across the in-game world, marvels at beautiful views, and jumps at any opportunity to make friends. It's heavily debated amongst the fandom as to whether Ellie would have been happy to die for the vaccine. Happy is poor phrasing, to be fair. Rather, would Ellie have felt obligated to die for the vaccine? Would she have resolved herself to do it? In her concluding speech, she states that she was still waiting for her turn, implying that she wallows in survivor's guilt. In some ways, the possibility of dying for the vaccine was secondary to a sense of personal atonement. Ellie isn't necessarily content to die for the future of humanity. Rather, she seems to feel like her death will settle a score with the people she has lost. Her line, "It can't all be for nothing," indicates an attitude that clings to a fantasy impression of life and living. Ellie is just beginning to come to terms with the reality that sometimes life and death are meaningless. Not only whether death is worth anything, but also that worth has very little to do with living. She clings to this idea that her death would mean something, when, as we learn during the hospital segment, and as I will discuss in the final section, there's a chance that it won't. Not impossible, but a chance. It's not so much that she sees her death as a grand sacrifice, like a chance for the world to rise again from her ashes, but she hopes it will be. This echoes Tessa's journey. When she realises her time is up, she wants to die with meaning. Ellie also hopes her death will have meaning. But fundamentally, as a 14-year-old, is she old enough to understand what this truly means for her? Any 14-year-old could tell you what death is, obviously. But does a 14-year-old understand the gravity of this situation? Born after the outbreak, during the apocalypse, Ellie has no sense of the world everyone around her wants her to save. It wasn't her world, she wasn't born into it. What she does come to find across the course of The Last of Us, however, is her reason to keep going, her treasure to protect, and that's Joel. The Fireflies don't bother to wake Ellie up before her surgery because they are scared that she will object to it. In my opinion, they needn't have worried. I personally think Ellie would have consented to the surgery. That said, I don't think she's old enough to be able to make that decision for herself, and I think it's selfish and irresponsible for them to take her in for surgery so young. If Ellie had been an older character, her death may, depending on their attitude, have played out as a noble sacrifice, a quiet, painless end seldom afforded to people in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. As a 14-year-old, it's the senseless waste of someone who is just beginning to explore a world she was desperate to understand. Her consent is dubious. Even if she had said yes, it's arguable that Joel was justified in removing her from the situation. The fact that she gives no consent at all means it's almost an obligation to have her removed from the situation, peacefully or otherwise. Although the attitude of the Fireflies towards bottom-of-the-barrel dregs like Joel is made clear in a throwaway comment from Tess.
I think it's a bit strange that they're having us do their smuggling.
Marlene wanted to do it herself. We weren't their first choice, or the second for that matter. She's lost a lot of men, beggars can't be choosers.
We don't see this in action until Joel meets any Firefly besides Marlene, who is, in contrast, very open-minded about who she works with. But damn, the Fireflies are awful people. From in-game clues and the opening credits voiceover, we get the impression that the Fireflies are a looming counterforce in the United States, aiming to overthrow the current government's martial law turned miserable police state, reinstitute general government, and pull humanity back to its feet. There's clearly a lot of facets to a goal like that. A lot can be inferred from a plan like that, but the only goal of theirs we ever see discussed is their vaccination plan. The thing about the Fireflies is that they are not the powerhouse we are led to believe they are. By the time we take control of Joel and the Boston QZ, the Fireflies are losing the battle and their numbers are dwindling. That's why there are no Fireflies at the University of Colorado. They've all been pulled back to the hospital in Salt Lake City. As confirmed in The Last of Us 2, this was the last bastion of the Fireflies, a small group of probably 50 people basically waiting for a miracle. The Fireflies intend to find a cure to the cordyceps infection and distribute it. A note on the University of Colorado campus from the time of the outbreak notifies us that 60% of humanity had become infected, but that number is likely significantly higher by the time Joel discovers it. That's still a few million people to vaccinate in a plan that needs widespread infrastructure and distribution. Now, the thing is, a lot of people argue about the feasibility of a large-scale vaccination program in a post-apocalypse dystopian America. I think it's worth discussing, but realistically there are two aspects to this discussion. Firstly, realistically, would a vaccine ever be made off the back of this? Secondly, does it matter whether a vaccine would be made off the back of this? Neil Druckmann, one of the co-writers of The Last of Us, has gone on record to say categorically, yes, if Joel hadn't killed the Fireflies and taken Ellie, then they would have successfully made a vaccine and saved humanity. If you want to take that as permission to believe that, then go ahead. Personally, I have a lot of issues with this statement, and I choose to disregard it. Although I'm about to argue the game should have had more conclusively drawn moral lines, you shouldn't suddenly announce one of them a decade later. It's very Dumbledore was actually gay the whole time, in my opinion. Firstly, Neil Druckmann is a writer who broaches interesting topics, but I find him severely lacking when it comes to discussions of moral quandaries. He's one of those writers who is talented but in an extremely hyper-specialised way. He writes some things extremely well, but struggles with absolutely everything else. His characters are inconsistent, his world building is weird, and he fails to account for leaps in logic where other writers would integrate more natural steps between story beats. Neil has almost always worked with writing partners who kept him in check and accounted for his writing mistakes. Now that he's abandoned partnerships and decided to go solo on all of his endeavours, his writing flaws tend to be abundant and completely unresolved by the time his work sees the light of day. Neil Druckmann's initial story pitch for The Last of Us was a story of revenge, where Tess would have chased Joel and Ellie across the entirety of the United States as revenge for her brother dying during their escape from Boston QZ, and she hates them and wants them to die. It was dismissed for being unrealistic and kind of stupid, so naturally when Bruce Straley left The Last of Us, Neil Druckmann made it the backbone of the story for The Last of Us 2, a game that still has its fans, but was ultimately far less liked across the board for the writing flaws I mentioned above. Bruce described his relationship with Sony as strained, and ended up scrubbed from the credits of the TV show too, which feels petty considering he was clearly the ballast that kept that story fittingly grounded. Furthermore, something I wish I'd discussed in my video of The Last of Us 2 was Neil's background. Neil Druckmann was born and raised in occupied Palestine before moving to the States. Although he's made a few extremely shitty tweets about Palestine in the past, he's never officially commented on the conflict, and I won't assume to know his current opinion on it. That's not what I'm trying to discuss here. Rather, my point, Druckmann said that he based The Last of Us 2 on how growing up as an Israeli in occupied territory made him realise that violence is bad, that fighting is bad, revenge is bad. Retaliation is bad. The Last of Us 2 sees Ellie witness a war between the civilized but militaristic WLF versus the tribal bow and arrow wielding religious cult, the Seraphites. Inspired by Druckmann's perspective growing up in the heavily militarized, internationally backed Israel, watching the violence against the people of Palestine who existed there before and have been displaced and bombed to pieces. Naturally, in The Last of Us 2 we don't learn who was here first, who attacked who first, historically relevant context that does make a difference, only that peaceful coexistence is merely impossible and they're trying to wipe each other out. Only the Seraphites, while based on an Arab country, are a largely white cult based on Christian teachings with a central messiah, replacing the typical targets of rampant Islamophobia with the most privileged religion on the planet, and replacing their roles as displaced indigenous people with that of a cult is extremely telling, considering the WLF are themselves a much more varied group with many characters we get to know know. Yes, leader Isaac is bloodthirsty, but the WLF are a far cry from the IDF, who take sadism beyond words proudly due to their conditioning. Also, while militarized, the WLF never seem to be able to shoot enough of the Seraphites. Somehow they always lose equal numbers to the Seraphites, placing the Seraphites community in that classic outsider perspective of being simultaneously weak and pathetic, but also a genuine threat that needs to be eradicated. Also, as a callback to our point about Joel being socially relatable earlier in the video, the only alley through which we know about the Seraphites is the character Lev, who was banished for being trans. Unlike the WLF, who demonstrate thorough equality across the board, we learn about the Seraphites through cultural standards we find socially unacceptable, causing knee-jerk disagreement. You don't necessarily like the WLF by the end of that game, but the story is positioned so as to dehumanize the people they're at war with. The more you look at it, the more blatant it is, and the more blatant the writing bias is. The bias here between writing the WLF and writing the Seraphites was almost as stark and intellectually stagnant as the central message of the game, which was violence is bad. I understood by the end of the prologue that violence and revenge are bad. To dredge through 20 hours of this horse shit and reach the final fight where the writing climbed upon stage, cum still rolling down its thighs, and went, and the moral of the story? Violence is bad, was a conclusion so jarring that I was genuinely taken aback. Did you really think we didn't get that, writers? What kind of don't hit other children message is this? Honestly, the mere existence of The Last of Us 2 boils my blood, and it is beyond me to understand how anyone finds this game profound. I think this demonstrates an extremely two-dimensional ability to critically assess the morality of violence. A war is not a war if one side can shut off the other side's access to all food and electricity, cram them into refugee camps, and then bomb the refugee camps without consequence. To see this kind of deeply complex conflict as a tit-for-tat playground argument, and to turn that into a morally flat, miserably shit game, demonstrates a lack of ability to write moral quandaries. Sorry, I hate The Last of Us 2. I think it's pseudo-liberal dogshit, and I think it's perfectly reflective of its writer's complete inability to produce anything that actually captures the essence of the human condition. Anyway, the reason that the ending of The Last of Us is so impactful as it already is, even when arguably contrived, is because it is a moral quandary. It is essentially the trolley problem, but with 1,000 unknown variables. Does Joel let the train run Ellie over, maybe saving the entire world in the process, or does he save Ellie and doom a world that may not deserve to be saved or may not have been saved regardless of her death? The point of The Last of Us is that we don't know there's a possibility of the vaccine. Ellie is the first immune person they've found. Her death might provide answers and it might not. The fact of the matter is that no one knows what the outcome of her death will be until she is already dead. And even if they could make a vaccine, would they have the infrastructure to dispense it? Would people take it? Would the bandits and cannibals and rapists the team have encountered across the journey deserve it? The ending of this game is uniquely positioned to absolve Joel from the consequence of judgment. In doing so, the circumstances of the vaccine are also positioned to fuel hypothetical discussions. One of the reasons that Joel sits in this moral grey area, for better or worse as we'll discuss, is because to even begin to judge him, one must sit down and decide to assume whether the vaccine would have worked. To retroactively announce, oh yeah, actually the vaccine would have worked, is unbelievably smug, self-indulgent, and quite disrespectful to the people who worked on that story with you. It also goes against rule 1 of writing impactful, lingering endings. Was Jack really a ghost at the Overlook Hotel? Was Cobb actually dreaming in Inception? Who is the strange man from Red Dead Redemption? What is the light and everybody's gone to the rapture? Who or what is Gaunter O'Dim in The Witcher 3? Are Dark Souls 1 and 2 set in the same universe, or are any connections merely referential? These questions all have potential answers, some of which are so compelling that they may as well be correct, but are never officially confirmed and consequently remain debated to this day. To retroactively announce the correct answer is to put an immediate end to the very discussion you were trying to stoke. There's no such thing as an alternative interpretation when one of the writers smugly announces the answer later down the line. This man physically cannot help himself from retroactively shitting all over his work. Like when he said the infected would spread cordyceps by kissing their victims if their victims didn't fight back. Stop adding details. It's like when J.K. Rowling kept popping up on Twitter to announce that wizards used to shit themselves and then magic away the evidence. If you're gonna confirm it in the game, or don't say anything at all. Some people considered this detail confirmed because of a confusingly worded surgeon's recording collectible that can be grabbed in the hospital section of the game. The recording states,
April 28, Marlene was right. The girl's infection is like nothing I've ever seen. The cause of her immunity is uncertain. As we've seen in all past cases, the antigenic titers of the patient's cordyceps remain high in both the serum and the cerebrospinal fluid. Blood cultures taken from the patient rapidly grow cordyceps and fungal media in the lab. However, white blood cell lines, including percentages and absolute counts, are completely normal. We're about to hit a milestone in human history equal to the discovery of penicillin. After years of wandering in circles, we're about to come home.
A few people, including literally me, up until the moment I went to check this was true while I was writing the script, took these specific phrases of "as we've seen in all past cases" to mean all past cases of immune subjects we tested on, when really this phrasing just means all past cases of infected people. Ellie has the same blood work and tests as fully infected people, but the surgeon is remarking on how this is shocking considering her immunity. As we learn, Ellie is infected. She's just not showing symptoms of infection. The fungus has spread into her brain and it's all there, just she hasn't turned into a zombie. For whatever reason, it doesn't work. In another fit of annoyance, the TV show added a ton of unnecessary detail here, but sorry, I'm trying to stay on track. I'm a weird Last of Us purist where anything added after the first game really bothers me because I hate how it's written, but I still find plenty to critique about the first game. Contradictorily super precious about it and not precious at all. I don't know, I watched the show from start to finish on a 14-hour flight in a crammed window seat, and if you'd have pulled me aside when I'd landed and asked me to recount anything that had happened in it, I'd have said mushroom kiss and then drop dead from a brain hemorrhage in front of you. Anyway, the game makes clear that Ellie is the first immune person the Fireflies have ever encountered, so they want to make the most of this, and if that involves killing her without her consent, then I guess they feel as though they deserve to make that choice. Does that mean they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine? Probably not. Even today we don't have a single vaccination against fungal infections, so to assume it's possible for some post-apocalyptic surgeon is to be ever a wishful thinker. But that doesn't mean they won't be able to produce any kind of treatment, like some kind of thrush pessary, but for brain control. I think the key thing here is that Joel isn't necessarily taking a guaranteed vaccine. He is taking hope away. And as with many other moral aspects of this game, we are given very particular pieces of information that skew down a very specific moral line. Are there other groups pursuing vaccines and we simply don't know because they haven't made a brand of themselves? Are there other immune people? How many cordyceps infected are left 20 years down the line? Presumably, you'd eventually retake civilization once enough time had passed. Is a vaccine the only answer? When we turn the conversation away from yes, no, black, white vaccine discussion, we're removing that definitive consequence from the shoulders of his actions. Instead, you're putting humanity's hope on his shoulders, and that's a far more subjective concept to discuss. How many people knew about the vaccine efforts? If it's only the Fireflies, has Joel really removed hope humanity didn't even know existed? Moreover, we see what humanity has become. Bandits, rapists, murderers on one side of the fence, and then fascist-controlled military states on the other side of the fence. Is the time of humanity just over? Should we just let it go? Tommy's group are a vast minority, and they're surrounded by walls living in settlements with running water and electricity due to the way they've come together as a community. No infected are getting through those walls, only people, and there's no vaccine for shithouse behaviour. The ending of The Last of Us is very carefully constructed so as to set up a situation wherein Joel is genuinely on track to lose more than humanity loses. No one was waiting for a vaccine with bated breath, no one knew about this. Joel's actions have no consequence because within the confines of the first game's story, he killed the consequences. The game's clear about that too. When Marlene begs for her life, Joel responds with,
"Let me go. Please."
You just come after her.
The factual existence of a vaccine is so contingent on so many unknowns that it's not even worth debating, yet it's waved in your face as a red herring to distract you from the real variable at play: hope. Would Joel be sitting in such a moral grey area at the end of this game if civilization was waiting for a vaccine? If people were already volunteering for trials? If the Fireflies somehow had already given humanity hope? Joel's behaviour is unquestioningly selfish, but no one who would mourn his actions is left behind to grieve them. Is it one life for humanity, or is it just one life for nothing? Even stepping back from the big picture, the Fireflies are no different from the bands of losers we see running around around post-dystopia America. Their noble goal is all that separates them from being as cold and cruel as the individuals Joel encounters on his travels, and he discovers this firsthand when he wakes up on that hospital bed after being knocked unconscious and Ellie taken away. Marlene's attitude towards Joel is hinted as early as their first meeting, when she suggests sneaking past some patrolling guards, only to add, "But I know that's not your style." She spits that sentiment out bitterly, clearly aware of who Joel is and how. At first, this seems like a basic disagreement between her as the leader of the resistance movement and him as an any means necessary mercenary, but the more you begin to read into Joel's background, the more you begin to realise he's on Marlene's radar because he's a cataclysmic piece of shit and likely an occupational hazard she works around. Still, this isn't truly hammered home until the moment Joel wakes up in a hospital bed. This, for me, is the most on-the-nose contrivance of the entire game, and actually the scene that convinced me to write this video. It's right at this moment that The Last of Us goes from subtly guiding its player into backing Joel regardless of the acts he commits, to basically forcing you to pick his side. Let's talk about it. When Joel comes to, Marlene is already sitting beside him. Despite her willingness to kill, her history, her combat experience, and the fact that this man is unarmed, injured, old, and lying in bed, she has brought an armed guard who stands at the foot of Joel's bed with his weapon drawn, staring daggers down at Joel. There's a lot to interpret in the way this scene has been set up so as to belittle Joel and goad the player before anyone even opens their mouth. Marlene doesn't need the backup. She made the trip from Boston to by herself. She was the only survivor. She's extremely capable. Joel is also very injured and drowsy. Marlene has the upper hand even when sitting by his bed. The unnamed Firefly stands up right at the end of Joel's bed, physically dominating the situation and staring down at him, forcing a physical hierarchy in the room, like a McDonald's bouncer standing at the end of your table when you're merely trying to enjoy a late-night drunk burger. For real, anyone who's had a bouncer come and stand by your table, glaring at you with their arms crossed, despite the fact that you're just three girls eating a burger after a work night out, knows the feeling. It's a play intended to make you feel uncomfortable, the man standing at the end of the bed doing it because he wants to play God over Joel, to make Joel feel physically small, to make Joel uncomfortable. It's a power move that does nothing but serve personal egos, and it's weird. Despite the fact that you're doing absolutely nothing besides sitting and chatting with your friends and enjoying a delicious strawberry milkshake, being stood over and supervised in silence by a person who is clearly looking for any reason to kick you out makes you bristle with annoyance. It makes you feel patronised. Not only is Joel being patronised, but so is the player, who has been along for the ride for the last 14 hours, depending. Joel's power is your power. He's never been in a situation like this. It's intended to piss the player off before Joel even notices. If Joel registers how badly afoot the Fireflies have started this scene on, he doesn't show it. His first words upon waking up, his first thoughts are of Ellie. Marlene asks him how he made it here, and Joel explains that it was all Ellie. This is the only moment Marlene speaks to him like an equal, and even then it's strained. You can see the way she's treating him from the get-go. To be blunt, she talks to him like he's a piece of shit, and maybe he is, maybe that's their history, but it's not our history with him, so the briskness earns briskness in return, the player senses the tension, the player gets frustrated. When Joel asks to see Ellie, Marlene bluntly refuses, telling him she's being prepped for surgery.
Take me to her.
You don't have to worry about her anymore. We'll take care of her.
I worry. Just let me see her, please.
You can't. She's being prepped for surgery.
The hell do you mean, surgery?
The doctors tell me the cordyceps, the growth inside her, has somehow mutated. It's why she's immune. Once they remove it, they'll be able to reverse engineer a vaccine. A vaccine.
But it grows all over the brain.
It does.
This is all the explanation Joel gets, and while it's a pretty thorough explanation, Marlene does not give this man a second to process it. Joel doesn't process his emotions at the best of times. Joel naturally goes straight to denial, telling them to find someone else. Classic sign of grief, very natural. Marlene nods at her loyal hound, who kicks Joel to the floor, physically dominating him and manhandling him from the word go.
But whatever it is you think you're going through right now is nothing to what I have been through. I knew her since she was born. I promised her mother I would look after her.
Then why are you letting this happen?
Because this isn't about me, or even her. There is no other choice here.
Yeah, you keep telling yourself that bullshit.
Marlene drops that Ellie is about to die for the good of the human race, which is a whole big statement of its own. Giving this man less than 60 seconds to suck it up, Marlene immediately jumps to violence when he doesn't take it all that well. Who would take this news well? Her contempt of him is so bizarrely written, especially when we find a voice recorder from her later in the hospital, where she muses that Joel might be the only person in that building who understands how she feels right now.
March him out of here. He tries anything, shoot him.
Treated like someone who got a tad too merry at the PTA meeting, Joel gets yanked to his feet and shoved out the door. The unnamed Firefly guard has a loaded pistol jabbed directly into his lower back from the moment he stands up, forcing him out of the room.
Give me an excuse.
This entire scene is manufactured to infuriate the player and rouse them into a level of violence they previously may never have considered. Players will permit violence in most games because there's an implicit understanding that it is required for the gameplay to continue. But The Last of Us is about to ask you to walk into a surgery room and splatter a surgeon across the walls like a garden hose. And for the majority of your players to buy into that, they need to be very angry. It's no coincidence that the meanest death in the game occurs here when Joel disarms this man and shoots him twice in the penis. This moment is intended to serve a few purposes. It's immensely cathartic for Joel and the player alike, able to emasculate a man that has made a point to physically dominate and emasculate Joel. It's a thrilling moment that aligns the player with Joel, getting firmly into that emotional ride or die backseat, what's next boss kind of moment, and it's a point of no return. Whoops, killed a Firefly. Looks like we broke the seal, may as well kill all of them now. Marlene's decisions here are baffling. Why not keep him sedated until the surgery is over? Hell, why not just kill him in his sleep if we're gonna shoot him at the first sign of him being sad? Also, I know that payment is secondary to Joel's motivations at this point in the story, but Marlene makes zero mention of it. That's another twist of the knife, the fact that she likely plans to pay him nothing after all this time, instead kicking him out on his arse. Why do they march him past his bag and belongings too? Are they planning to keep all that and throw him out? What's more, there are like 50 Fireflies left. They know about Ellie, they know Ellie was last seen with a man in his 50s. Did they not really stop and think when they saw two people wash up matching that description? Why not let Joel and Ellie say goodbye to each other? Why not give Joel time to process it? Why not treat him with more empathy? Don't waste this gift, Joel, Marlene says before having him marched out at gunpoint with none of his belongings and no mention of a reward he lost everything for. After a thorough and organic introduction to and player adoption of Joel and Ellie and a compelling vaccination moral question, this 5-minute cutscene is a dagger in the back of that effort. Of all the story beats in this game, this cutscene is probably the thing that started to annoy me. Probably because after a few viewings, the annoyance of Joel's treatment starts to wear off, and you're able to start thinking critically about the techniques employed to put the player into a headspace required to compel them to kill true innocence. And to be clear, I think Joel would kill innocence for Ellie. I just think this final cutscene is so ham-fistedly insistent on pivoting Joel away from the true evil of killing innocents because they're so scared you won't like him by the end, into a situation where he is arguably acting in self-defense of himself and Ellie. It's hard to say that Joel sabotaged Ellie's self-sacrifice when it's a choice she wasn't allowed to make. It's safe to say that this trek across America cost Joel his entire life. He could never go back to the Boston QZ. His best and only friend, Tess, is dead, rendering it a pointlessly painful proposition. And who is left beyond that to hang out with? Bill? Joel would be out on his arse in a week. I wonder if the QZ inhabitants just assume he's dead. Maybe his apartment has been cleared out and a new tenant moved in. Besides, the place is corrupt, requiring repeated mandatory military service for all ages, soldiers killing dissenters in the streets should they refuse to cooperate. Although Tess and Joel agree to ferry Ellie to the Fireflies in exchange for a score of guns big enough for them to essentially retire, Joel finishes his journey realising that the guns and his retirement mean nothing if Ellie needs to die for them. To be clear, I don't think Joel would have taken any other action in that moment besides storming that hospital for Ellie. He would have lived the rest of his life in regret had he not at least died trying. As we drift ever more towards the end of this video, let's cycle back to that initial triangle and look at the ending. I think that outside of some very select circumstances, Joel would always have stormed that hospital. I just believe that the specific context was selected and massaged into place so as to very carefully position Joel in the perfect moral middle ground, positioned as such to avoid judgment. Personally, I think this was cowardly. As I'm sure I've made extremely clear by now, the bulk of The Last of Us is spent coming to love Joel as a person despite his flaws. It's about taking a villain, showing us the really sad stuff, telling us about the really bad stuff, and then making us love him anyway. It's a carefully manufactured creative exercise with the main goal of asking, can a truly irredeemable man find redemption? And that is why I think it is coward's work to not follow through. What would the ending be if Ellie fully consented? Joel would be a murderer who killed a surgeon and selfishly disregarded the dying wishes of his adoptive daughter. Bastard. What would the ending be if the Fireflies treated Joel with empathy and support after learning he was about to lose his adoptive daughter? Joel would be someone who saw his suffering as so truly unique that he needed to kill people around him, people who had lost children and friends too, just because he felt his experience was so unique that he deserved everything he wanted out of it. What would the ending be if the vaccine was guaranteed from Ellie's surgery? Joel would be a man who had not even had the foresight left in him to spare the doctor in case another immune person came along and damned the planet in exchange for one girl who merely meant too much to him to lose. The thing is, all of these choices would have been understandable. People would have still empathized with him because the point of this game isn't necessarily the moral judgment at the end. It's an exercise in seeing how far people will go to support the actions of someone who commits true evil, and what it takes to humanize him enough to earn that support. How much do you have to empathize with Joel before you'll back his actions even when knowing they're evil is a really compelling premise for a game. Having him suddenly in a situation so contrived at the end that he could not possibly be judged on moral grounds is cowardly. The ending has been specifically engineered to produce a very niche situation wherein Joel is above judgment. In some ways this works because it means we are forced to judge him on the same patchy information that he was forced to make his decision in. But in some ways this doesn't work because it means that Joel walks a line beyond judgment, which is cowardly. But it also means that any discussion about the ending stops and ends with whether Joel was right. I think that in this particular situation Joel was correct, but only because the ending had been manufactured to make Joel correct. Any dispute is often rooted in hypotheticals, i.e. whether Ellie would have been the final piece in the puzzle to make a working vaccine, so it falls apart when held under scrutiny. From the pieces we were given, yes, Joel is using evil means to enact a conclusion that cannot be judged without all the evidence, but the pieces we're given are specifically geared towards forcing us into that corner. An ending where Joel was objectively immoral would be just as compelling, instead rooting our relationship to the game in unpacking how we perceive villains who are also human, and whether those choices were valid in a world we can imagine but cannot understand. To spend an entire game building up a character we love through demonstrations that he does things wrong and is a flawed person with a history of unnecessary violence is to sit back and trust that your player is with you every step of the way. And the player is. The game is written so well that the majority of people who play it come out still really liking Joel. It's a testament to the writing that Joel's villainy is only acknowledged in think pieces. Similar to Walter White, people love the character and even fewer people will acknowledge the critical thought required to appreciate that he is a bad person, because for a lot of people, if I like you it means you're good, and to suggest that you are bad suggests that I, as a person, am bad. So you can't possibly be a bad person, and if you do think that he's a bad person, then you're suggesting that by extension I'm also a bad person, and that makes me very personally offended. To have written an ending where Joel is objectively good or objectively bad would be to place Joel in a situation where his actions suddenly become something the player can judge. And for some reason, the writing is terrified of that, and I don't understand why. You might have wondered why I put a spoiler warning for Shadow of the Colossus at the start of this video. Well, I'm 24,000 words in now, so I can only assume this video will be hitting the 10-minute mark as I make it, so prepare yourself, that fruit is about to bear trees. In Shadow of the Colossus, we spend an entire game killing golems to resurrect our girlfriend, only to realise that the golems held pieces of an evil god, and by killing them we are slowly releasing him back into the world piece by piece, and while he will resurrect our dead girlfriend, we will also be releasing a great and powerful evil into the land. Sorry, what I'm trying to say is, games where characters we're rooting for suddenly become villains because our perspective shifts to a bigger picture that their actions now make true sense in are not only well established, but legendary entries in the pantheon of all-time greatest games of all time. Wanda is the villain of Shadow of the Colossus. Everyone in his world knows not to go all the way to the Forbidden Lands because they are forbidden. It's likely well established that they're forbidden because evil lurks there. Wanda goes anyway because he's selfish and he would rather doom a world to die than say goodbye to the girl he loves. We don't even know if she knows him. And how would you describe Wanda? Tragic? Misguided? Unfortunate? Yes, this reluctance to place Joel in any kind of position of judgment is an unnecessary precaution out of fear an audience will turn on him. And going by track records of villains like Wanda all the way across the spectrum to bastards like Walter White and Saul Goodman, we see a selection of people who are beloved despite their evil, sometimes because of it, because they're so fantastically well written that they're relatable and human. I made this video to demonstrate to you that The Last of Us is an incredible game. It is crammed full of subtext and actual just straight text, a cast of characters you love regardless of what they do, legendary action scenes, some of the greatest cathartic moments in gaming, and of course, all-time top game rant hidden details. For example, did you know it's set in America? I think it's an incredible game that was so scared of being disliked that it failed to commit to its overarching question: can a truly irredeemable man, with time, perspective and context, become redeemable? To take all of that work, all of that effort, those hours and hours of character development, that extremely organic journey of growth with all the information we'd need to root for Joel despite his demonstrably evil past, and boil it down into an ending sequence so dredged up that it was probably sitting at the base of Lake Baikal, is almost a waste of that time. If we were going to ping Joel through some of the biggest leaps of logic based on some of the weirdest out-of-character choices of any in-universe individual, why did we do do all that careful construction in the first place. Joel doesn't need to be morally grey for an audience to like him. He doesn't need to technically be doing the correct thing through incorrect methods. He doesn't need to have several layers of hypotheticals sitting between him and moral judgment. While the ending of The Last of Us is impactful, the argument I hope I've presented to you today is that it could still have succeeded if it was twice as impactful, twice as extreme. To watch Joel perform actions of true monstrosity and still come out liking him was, I think, not only possible, but guaranteed. Irredeemable as he was human, and that counts for much more than you think.